And at this time, we will call to order the special meeting of the Salina City Commission for February 16, 2016. And we'll start with a roll call, please.
Mayor Blanchard.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Okay, great. Thank you all for being here today. If you would, please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Item 3.1, second reading, Charter Ordinance Number 39, a charter ordinance exempting the City of Salina, Kansas from the provisions of KSA 13-1024A and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to general improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements and repealing Charter Ordinance Number 38.
Okay. Get an update from Mr. Gage.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As you know, this morning we have the item that was just introduced to you, a decision on the charter ordinance. And also, as we know, there are a lot of questions and project aspects that lead into that decision. So we're here again today, and what we have lined up for you is we want to be pretty disciplined with our time because going to say 10:45, 10:50 seems like a lot of time. It's really not when we get into a difficult topic. So what we have planned for you is first we'll have John Frew with Frew Development, who is the city's owner's representative. John will coordinate. He'll have some comments. He'll introduce the project team that's here today, and he'll coordinate presentation. And what we'll ask for you to do, if you can, is to hold right down your questions so we can get them through the presentation. And then after that, it's your choice. You can either, of course, do the question and answer session or citizen input first, or however you'd like to do that. But we want to get them through the presentation, then do that. And then I will likely, if we're not to a point where we feel like we're hitting a decision point by, say, 10:30-ish, I'll likely kind of jump in and try to ask you if I can commandeer your time, because there's really two primary questions we need to answer, maybe a third question. The two primary questions, obviously the one on the agenda is the charter ordinance amount, and it's a time-sensitive question. The other question is a design concept, because whether it's design, the charter ordinance, it all leads to the same time frame, and we need to be, we'll have a recommendation for you, but we need your direction so that we can direct the designers to whichever direction they're going to focus quickly on that. Because while it appears we still have quite a bit of time between now, since we're still in February, and say April, where we're at in the design stage, they need to utilize that time very, very efficiently. So we really don't have time to redesign anything else. But we do think we can still button up a project, even if we have some redesign options, which you'll see here in a little while. So we'll need your guidance on the design concept, on the charter ordinance, and then you may have questions again, as you did before, on the procurement, guaranteed maximum price in that process versus maybe a competitive bid. And so you'll have folks that'll be able to answer questions and help you with that. So those are the main issues, and with that, I'll let John Frew go ahead and step up and get us started.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, Commissioners, Mayor. My name is John Frew. Our company is the owner's rep for this project. We've been honored to be the city's owner's rep for the bicentennial renovation and the renovations to the fire station. We do this all around the country. We've built rodeos in Oregon. We've demolished homes after Hurricane Sandy. We've built AAA hockey arenas in Cedar Park, Texas, and Broomfield, Colorado. We built hotels and convention centers in Cedar Rapids, and on and on and on. The nice thing about our role is that our projects tend to be impactful projects for communities. They tend to be very visible projects. And our role and our job to you is to put the decisions in front of you in the right order, in the proper sequence, to allow the policymakers to make the decisions And that's what today's all about. So with me, and you'll hear from different folks here, McCown Gordon is the general contractor, the construction manager at risk for this project. Chris Stanton and Todd Knight are with us. SFS Architecture is the architectural firm retained. Kerry Newman and George Knipp are here, and you will hear from them. Keith Searcy from our staff. I had dinner with Keith last night, and he started as an intern for us out of a community college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, worked on a project there. We sent him to New York, and he did great there, and then he came to Salina. And last night he says, John, whatever happens, I'm yours. I'm with your company. I'll go wherever you want me to go, but please don't ask me to leave Salina. I love it here. So thanks for being so good to him. Mike Scragg, Steve Hardesty, and of course Dion have been part of so much of what you're going to hear today, and we thank them for all that. So it's really been a great team to work with. Let me go through just some highlights before we get into some of the details. We've tried to define this in a way so that the community and people listening can start to look at this from 30,000 feet. And just imagine it's a funnel. We're going to go from very, very broad to very, very narrow. That the project goals overall, is a turnkey process that delivers a facility to serve the community and to host regional sporting events. Both those things balance out. So out of that, satisfaction of STAR bond requirements. Congratulations on the news in this morning's paper. Building that functions well for each intended use. And that may seem simple, but if it doesn't come together, it doesn't work, if it hasn't been designed right and built right, that won't happen, and that will cost time and money and frustration. We think we're well on our way, no matter what your decision is today, to produce that. To provide recognized standards of amenities and services appropriate to each event. That has an impact on how you build this building and design it, because you might look at multiple flooring ideas and you can have them all, but if they're temporary and you're going to move them, you have to store them someplace. So storage starts to become an issue. A facility to designed to minimize life cycle costs. We spend a lot of time thinking through things like light bulbs. You might spend $10 for a bulb instead of $2, but it's going to last you 3 times as long. So those life cycle costs have a lot to do with how this building is designed. Excuse me. A functional, attractive atmosphere for smaller events, not requiring the minimum capacity of the facility. Can you host an event without turning all the lights on? And that's important. How you zone this, how you work it, and how you manage it. We want to leave you with something that's very, very functional for the community. Delivery within established project budget and delivery within established project schedule. I put that in, and I emphasize the word established. This is for you to decide. This is a policy decision, and a lot of what you're going to hear has to do with those two things balancing off with each other. The evaluation criteria. We can make a list much, much longer than this, but I don't want anyone to look at this in any particular order. But these are the essentials. Someone can say, I'll build the building and produce it for you, but are you going to build the building that the city wants and expects? What are the design standards? Are you going to have the essential elements in the building? And you can almost work from the bottom up to emphasize that there's no order of priority, but all of the buildings you're going to see today, all the options have a concession stand, they have a first aid room, they have bathrooms, men's, women's, family. They have multi-purpose rooms. There's circulation for personnel. There's a whole question of the drive aisle, the ease of access, and some have more, some have less. Parking, some have more, some have less. There's a reliance on downtown parking and shared parking inherent in this project, but nonetheless, there's on-site parking. Conversion of use. This is one of those things that those of us in the industry will look at and say, what's your conversion staff? So, if any of you have gone to, any of the big games in Kansas City or, any of the colleges, any place, and even here at the Buy Center, maybe not quite as often, but there's a conversion staff. And sometimes you're going from hockey to basketball, you've got 6 hours. If you go from basketball to hockey to a concert, you've got 4 hours. And that staff comes in, moves the court, changes things, puts it together, they convert it. That's an operational cost. So how you build, how you design can make a difference on those costs and how you can get more out of your building. Storage is a huge issue. Again, we'll come back to that particular one, but that does have an effect on decisions made. The lobby, how big is it? What's it for? Is it to get in and out, or is it space to hang out? Is it space for people just to be? That's a big issue. It comes down to the very top one, which is square feet. The status of design I put in here because of all the things you're going to see, what we'll call the 4-2 option is designed. So through the design process, schematics, just pretty pictures, here's what we're going to do. The next stage is or programming and schematics. The next stage you get into to design documents, and you're starting to put some of the 3D, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems in. And then you get to the construction documents, and that's the specific communication, incredible detail that allows the bidders to bid on the project. This project is at the 30% CD stage. This project is nearly completed. So changes made today will have an impact on time and budget and fees for the architect to make changes. The fewer changes made, the quicker you can get it done and less of a budget impact. We've tried to keep that in mind as we've made recommendations to you at the end of this. Turf fields, 4 hard surface basketball courts at a minimum. Those two things go hand in hand. And then ultimately total square feet. Simplest way to make a budget is to reduce the building. And throughout the course of this, I want to emphasize that we have designed to a program, not to a budget. We have designed to the ideals and the narrative and all the things that the city has told us that they wanted and needed in this project and the stakeholders versus hitting this number. If we were told to hit $9 million, we would have given you a $9 million building. But you would have rejected it, I believe. It is not a realistic number. It is a realistic number for a 50,000 square foot building with fewer bells and whistles. But it is not a realistic number for what you have expressed or the city has expressed and the stakeholders have expressed is needed and wanted. And as you look at these different options, what we call scoping is critical. Are you making an apples to apples comparison? And that too we'll get into some detail. So with that in mind, I'm going to have the SFS guys, I'm not sure who's going to make the presentation. We're going to start walking through five options. We've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks, the last few days, yesterday in particular. We had meetings all throughout the day with the city staff. Brian Richardson was nice enough to come in and spend a couple of hours with us. Excellent conversations. There are no bad ideas here. They're just ideas that all go to get to that goal of what is it that you want and need. And I think we have some solutions for you. So we're going to start with the initial concept from 2013. We're going to take a look at the 4x2 concept, the one that's nearly completed. What you're going to find is that has budget numbers to it that are fairly precise. And we're going to use those numbers to help us come up with numbers and budgets for the others. Option 3 is the 3x3 concept. And these are in no order, but I thought 3 ought to be 3x3 because it's easy. Number 4 is the 3x3 modified, and that's what we're going to zero in on. And number 5 is the whole smash. It's everything. You're going to see it'd be a great building, but it would cost you way more than you would have, and I think it delivers probably more than you need, and it's not likely, but we wanted, nonetheless, to put that in to give you that option. So, guys, who's going to take this from here? Okay. And I'll run.
Is there a pointer on there? Maybe?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
I do have one. I'll get one for you. Then.
Okay.
So we're just forward back.
Okay. Thank you, John. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you. So we'll walk through these concepts.
Excuse me, can we just get your name? For the
I'm sorry, Kerry Newman with SFS Architecture.
Okay, great, thank you.
And with me is George Knipp, and he'll be helping me as well during this presentation. So this was the 2013 initial concept. 6 courts. It had 4 courts on the right, central support area, lobby, support space, restrooms, and then 2 courts on the left. So you would have 6 total courts available. This did not show any turf area at that time. You can see some of the stats up in the upper right-hand corner, total area of 68,000 square feet. These are some of the images that were presented at that time. making use of the existing parking that was there. You can see generally the layout of the building on the site. This is the what we're calling 4x2 concept, which has 4 permanent basketball courts on the right. And I'll see if I can get this thing to work. So these are let me back up a little bit. We have our front entry here into a lobby space. This is our support space, which is restrooms and storage and mechanical space. We have multi-purpose rooms here and a concession space here, a very small office for administration. And then we had our 4 permanent courts. These would be 4 hard surface wood courts. We spent a lot of time looking at clearances around courts and accommodating for spectator seating and player benches. We have a solid wall here for acoustic control, entry points into the gyms for the spectators as well as for the players and coaching staff. On the left is the turf area. This would be a synthetic turf, obviously. And then the plan was, we can go into this later, but there would be 2 courts, 2 hard surface courts underneath the turf, so that when you needed 6 courts for a tournament, the turf would be removable. This is the site plan layout. 5th Street along here. There was a small amount of parking here, and then we have a drop-off lane very close to the entry. Tried to limit the amount of paving and sidewalk on site, but to make sure there was a good connection between the existing parking lot to the south and our site. Also looking at how this site would connect to the parking to the west as well was important to consider, since there would be, as John mentioned, reliance on the parking that's downtown. And this would be accommodate accessible parking as well as some additional parking beyond that. As I mentioned, 47 on-site parking. This would be a double-loaded drop-off lane so that we could have some room to park along the curb and still have room for cars to pull through around that. So room for 5 to 6 cars in that drop-off lane. We also, during the design, realized that there would need to be a fire lane that would come around on the east side as well. So that's shown on this plan. So moving into the third option, which is the 3x3 concept. In this concept, we have 3 permanent courts on the right. We have an enlarged lobby space to accommodate both egress, code egress for the courts area, as well as some additional space just for people to gather, hangout space between games and after games. The multipurpose rooms have been reoriented to be a little bit more direct connection to the lobby space and to open that area up a little bit. The concession space is right here. This is the front entry that comes in. The central support space is very similar to what we've looked at on the previous concepts with restrooms, storage space, and mechanical. And then we have a single turf area as well. And so the idea on this concept is that you would have room for 3 additional basketball courts underneath the turf here. We would have a single, these would be 3 permanent wood courts, a portable wood court. So we would have 4 wood courts, and then 2 courts that are a hard surface court that would be under the turf. So you still have 6 courts that are available during large tournaments and 4 courts that are available during normal times. So this one just has a little bit reduced turf space available. As well, this, as you'll notice, there's quite a few site improvements on this. We have additional parking that's been added to give us a total of 84 on-site parking spaces. We've increased this drive aisle, so we have some angled parking off the drive aisle and still have room for drop-off space to exit onto the street, onto the Fifth Street. This is what we're calling a modified 3x3 plan. What we've done on this concept is this has a little bit less lobby space than the previous concept. The idea being that we accommodate the egress requirements for the courts and then provide a little additional hangout space, not as much hangout space, not as much additional lounge space as you saw in the previous concept. This also creates additional circulation space and clearance around the courts that really are needed for turning the courts in this direction. And in order to get 3 courts into that north building and turning them this way, we need some additional space. So this allows for that space. It also provides some storage space for the turf panels when we remove those from these courts. If we want to use the 6 courts for a tournament, we have to have a place to store that turf, so we have some additional space for that, as well as for seating, spectator seating for the turf events as well as for the basketball events. This is the 3x3 that's a little bit, the difference between this concept and the previous concept is it has the additional lobby space. So you can kind of see the circulation space. There's kind of a line drawn here. That's really the circulation space that's needed for egress purposes for the courts and the turf area. And then we have this additional lounge space, hangout space, gathering space. Again, similar, same kind of sports areas. We have the 3 permanent wood courts, and then we have the, this was a temporary, or portable, I should say, wood court, and then 2 courts that are under the turf. This is the final concept. This is the combined concept.
Sorry, I snuck this one in on him. But we wanted to show you that in our effort to take big bites out of this, incremental changes, it's difficult to really reduce square feet. So an option was to lop off about 7,000 square feet on the north end. And that's what that bar shows. So that would reduce the overall size and not allow those courts to turn sideways, but they would be permanent in that end-to-end position. It's not something that we pursued, but we played with a lot of ideas as to how could you reorient this. And in the end, there are 3 buildings really on the right, on the left, and then in the middle. And you want to do as little, to impact. If you're going to make an impact, ideally impact 1 versus 2 or 3, and that's what this showed. So it sets up the next one.
Thank you. Thanks, John. And the drawback to this concept is that it really limits the use of the turf area. It becomes a very narrow, long turf space. So that was really the drawback of reducing this area, like John was mentioning. It still has the same number of courts, but it did limit the turf space. So this is the having 4 courts, 4 permanent courts in one location, the expanded lobby, the kind of reconfigured multipurpose space, and then the full turf area. And as well as on the site, same thing, the expanded parking area, the drive-through, and angled parking.
So next, we're going to talk about the budget. Chris Stanton from McCown Gordon is going to join me, if I can. Let me set this up. So what you've just seen, the initial concept 2013, concept 2, the 4x2, concept 3, the 3x3. We didn't go into the last concept, which was the 74,000 square footer. But we're going to end up with what we call the recommended, which was a 3.4B. This one. This will be our recommended. I don't. Hopefully, Brian Richardson's here somewhere. But Brian, the meeting. Yeah, there you are. Right. The meeting yesterday was really very helpful, and he we just said, look, blank sheet of paper. What's the best outcome here? And he convinced us that the 3x3 option was the best outcome. We spent quite a bit of time after that. Ultimately, Jason Gage reached the same conclusion, and we started tinkering around with what does that mean in terms of all those elements. And ultimately, the biggest impact is the lobby, and trying to create more space for, as we've talked, both circulation and location space. But this is what we're going to focus on as we go through the budget. I just wanted you to have the benefit of that advance of that notice. So, how do you want to do this? Start away.
Sure. Thanks. Hi again. I'm Chris Stanton with McCown Gordon Construction. So my job is to work with the design team and with the city on the estimating, the pricing, and the numbers, the detail of the cost. So what you see before you are 4 different numbers. The initial, which is from 2013. Number 2, the 4x2, which is where we've been working on the detail and the design currently. Number 3, the 3x3 that went through the couple of different modified ones of the recent scheme that's out there, and then the recommended. So the way we've broken this down is the base building. What you're looking at here across the board is for most of them is the construction costs for the building. This number is from what we've received from, I believe, from the investor team in the past few weeks, looking through some of those previous budgets. This is the 4x2, what we have done over the past, actually since July, I believe it was when we brought on board, is starting and getting into the detail of the pricing, what's in the project. And what we've done is we've gone through on the 4x2 and quantified how many doors are in the building, how many frames are with those doors, what type of building is it, the installation. A lot of details have gone into the pricing on the 4x2 of what's in there. And then what we did is we took that detail and we went to the 3x3 building and we re-quantified it, and based on the pricing that we've seen, received, or know of, we repriced the 3x3 option. So right, wrong, or indifferent, it was known pricing that we had, that we received. When we go through and we do our pricing, we've reached out to a number of local subcontractors. Not all of them. We have not bid the project yet. We're budgeting at this phase. Once the construction documents are complete, the project will go out to bid. We'll receive a number of those. The components that we've bid to date have been the pre-engineered metal building, which we got 6 bids on, and the gym equipment, which we got 5 bids on. We have not made a recommendation. We've kind of put the gym equipment on hold for right now. So after that, we went through and said, okay, based on the designs, what's out there and what we know, there are a number of things that's come through in the detailed design. There's been a SOLS report that's been done, it's been engineered, and they've made recommendations of fly ash, how we treat the sub-base, removing the footings, a number of things that go on the site. There's a fire lane that has, like Carrier John mentioned earlier, that we got to put along the east side so the fire department can have access in and out of the building. And with that, there's curbs and storm sewers and a number of things that go in that made it fairly expensive. So we went through and started looking at what's the equalization. And I got a list of the site furnishing benches, doing block walls at the toilets so they're durable for the city and they're not replacing gypsum walls. Lobby appearance signage, storage fencing, insulation, upgrading the insulation and mechanical system so it operates more efficiently, in the walls and ceilings. LED lighting, to get back to John, it gets back to an operational piece, it gets back into a longevity piece. You don't have to replace lights all the time or as often. Security card access, relocating streets along the street. There's a number of things that go into that. So that's what those were and those components there. The 292, that got into the dual courts in this option, so we'd have that capability to have the additional 2 courts out there as well too. So that's what that was. The site costs, in this initial budget, we saw several of the site costs in that $7.1 million. We don't know the full extent of that. If it appeared to be looked to clean up the existing parking lot that's there in the northwest corner, if I remember correctly, which would reuse that parking lot that's there. It's owned by the city now. The toilet restroom building that's there with lighting panels in. That's the other thing with the other options is that parking lot would have to come out. The buildings come down. There's a lighting control panel that controls the city lights. Those have to be taken out and relocated. So a number of things there that went into those site costs. Excuse me. And then inflation. So this is something that from 2013 that was, we were asked by John and his team in our interview, what do you see with costs? Where are they at? What's going on? Our recommendations, we're seeing anywhere from 3 to 4% annually on what's going on with costs. And it's driven with what's going on in the market. Commodities are flat, as you see on gas, what's going on with it, and fuel. But what we're seeing is labor is a big issue, trying to get labor. So people are paying, can be paying more to get people coming in to do the work. And I think, John, you mentioned, I don't know, what was the range that you heard in our interviews of inflation?
Anywhere from 4 to 6.
So right now, on this instance, we use 4%. So, and then this starts getting down into a lot. This is a master budget. It's not just construction, bricks and sticks. This is everything that's required by the city and the investor team to build this building. So how much to acquire the land. There were other costs out there for the corner lot that some designs required, some didn't. FF&E, fixtures, furnishing, and equipment. What goes inside the building? Chairs, seats, trash. There's interior trash cans. We have the outside ones in our construction budget that go in there as well. Art is a component that's being discussed by the city. They want to have a nice art installation out there, and I think those are some budgets discussed by the city and what's out there. Professional fees. This gets into any design, architects, engineers, et cetera, on what goes on with the project. Contingency for the project that is held by the city and managed by John Frew and his team. And then any alternates that are out there. So those totals that are in there. And I might mention, as we're going through doing our detailed estimates, we're also working with John Frew and Jason Imhoff from Frew Development, and Jason is going through all the line items. Why is it this? Why are you spending this much here? What's this? He's going through the detail of this pricing very, very diligently for the city. So, and then at the bottom, we're just starting to compare where we're at for building areas and cost per square foot. So, do you want to hit any more, John, there on the alternates and such?
I think a couple of things to point out. The square foot price it's a slippery concept. The initial 2013, 68,000 square feet, $174. We point out that does not include a lot of stuff. It does not include, for example, the fire lane, a drop-off lane, the corner lot acquisition, restroom demolition, that little building, parking lot reconfiguration. I think we could put $1.5 million minimum on that number. So if anyone thought that $9 million was a good number, it's 13 plus, and I would stake, a steak dinner on that one. I think that number has a lot of things that aren't in that. Not out of malicious or trying to trick anybody. These numbers are 2 years old. I think at the time people were just doing their best to come up with a number. But now that we have a site and a location and a program, and you apply that, there are things that are missing. So I discount that number altogether. It should be much, much higher, but we didn't want to, do anything other than report to you what we had. Second is that on the far right, and what you're going to see, the idea that a smaller building could cost more starts to come down, and that starts to erode when we go through the bidding process. You'll see on FF&E the initial had 275 because that's what they had in, and we thought that was not sufficient, especially if you have a bigger lobby, because you saw in that lobby all the furniture and everything in there. So again, we don't want to be wrong on this. I think that number will continue to come down as we go through the process, which we'll talk about further in a second. And then last, it does not include any ad alternates. Let's go to that. What's an ad alternate? Well, as you bid these projects out, you can bid them in pieces. You try to bid the base building. But then you'd say, well, what if you want to have something a little different? So ideally, it's something that doesn't have to be designed, but if it is, you ask the design team to do exactly that. So in the case of the lobby, I'm going to go back and was that it? Yeah. So what's designed is this hard line right now. That's designed. All that's designed. But what's also designed is this dotted line to bring that down. And that's an ad alternate that then we can, when we put this out for bid, we can ask the bidders to tell us what it would cost in addition to their base budget to build that. And then it's a policy decision for you. There are a lot of these things that we can put in, but the main ones we start with are, we're going to call them A, B, C, D, and E. A, B, and C only apply to option 2. Why? Because the other all have some element of that in. The mezzanine and the enhanced exterior too, that none of them have in. The enhanced exterior is a very nice enhancement to the exterior of the building that it has a very, very high price tag. Nonetheless, that is something that we can put out for bid, or at your direction we can look at different designs and ask the bidding community to provide us options. The mezzanine, I could probably go to this. The mezzanine is this. This is the bathroom area, and this is his storage area. These buildings, I'll bet you can ask, 100 cities across the country who have built these, and 100 cities will say, we don't have enough storage. Doesn't matter how big you build it, there's always room, and there are always things to put in. In this case, if you build 1, 2, 3 hard courts, and this is a hard court, whether that's a permanent court or a temporary court, makes a big difference. If these two would be what we call a plastic. Plastic is kind of a Kleenex description. There are a lot of companies that do this. Plastic is a company that does it among the best, and it's just that hard rubberized court that you can run on, bounce a ball on. It's very, very durable. You can paint lines on it. You can play a basketball game on it. What you can also do is put panelized turf on it. And if you do that, well, when you want to use that for the hard court, you got to put the turf someplace. So that's what this storage is here for. But now what if you want to move this basketball? This is in panels. What if you want to pick that up and put it somewhere? As we go through this process, if we find that this is not a large enough storage area, then we have the option to build this out up on top. The number that you see on the ad alt, 509,000, that's actually to put people up there. That is an elevator, that's stairways, that's conditioned air. That's to actually have people up there with, windows looking down at the games. That's one way to do it. There's another way that's far cheaper than that. That's just storage. I can tell you that in Hermiston, Oregon, we're bringing a building on very similar to this, 30,000 square feet. It's going to be finished in about 2 months. We did the same thing, and we built storage space 3,000 square feet above the offices and bathrooms. And we put one stairway in. It's not open to the public, so there's no elevator, but there's a large door off of this 15,000 square foot hall where they can open it up. The forklifts lift up the tables, carts, chairs, and everything, and they store it. So you're using the same footprint of a building, only you're using dead space. So it's cheaper to build as long as you don't build it out for people to occupy it. Once you do that, then ADA compliance and everything comes in, gets more expensive. So did we get through all of the, one last one, a key one, I just want to, not picking on anyone, I just want to make sure that I've been clear on this, that SFS has done a great job designing. They've done what we've asked them to do. Their fees amount to approximately $705,000 plus expenses. They are paid, as all architects are on commercial projects, based on milestones. As you finish the schematic design, the design documents, the construction documents, you're paid as you go through, and it's a monthly pay app. We double check it, we submit it to the city. What we hold back are two things. First is 5% for retainage till the job's completely done. Still have that. Second is 20% for what we call construction phase administration. Because as you build this, there are hundreds of questions that are going to come up, interpretation questions of the drawings, that you have to have them there, integrated in that process. So they don't get paid that until they go month by month by month through construction. But the other 80%, they're 30% through construction documents. So they've already earned about 75%. So that's the importance of not making too many changes. And if you do, just remember there are 3 buildings. So if you make changes that affect all 3 buildings, that's not as efficient as making changes that affect 1 building or 2. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Our fees, by the way, are just a flat fee. Doesn't matter what the building costs. It's a flat fee that we negotiated with Dion and Jason, and if it's just paid by the month. If someone said, and I've even offered this to Jason, if in any way it's more helpful for us not to be a part of this, we're here for you, and we'll do whatever you want us to do. But there's no elasticity in what you pay us. There's retainage, it's just through the month, so that's pretty equal math. Let's then go last to next steps. First, design direction and funding to be determined by the city, and that's what we hope we begin to reach some conclusions with today. Second, and this is what Chris had referenced, we're up to over 50 ideas to bring back now to say, let's make these changes. Here are ideas where you can save some money. And some things the code compliance officers will say, no, you can't do that. Some things you might say, well, do we really need this or want this? The Tectum panels that are sound baffling panels that have large lettering and signage on them. You can separate the lettering and do that cheaper. So we're really getting down to details to bring that number, that far right number that was a little over 12 million. We believe we can bring that down. Third, present construction cost after all that is done back to you for approval. You give us the direction, we'll complete the construction documents, we'll bid this out, and we'll commence construction. So, guys, I want to invite anyone to come up if I've missed anything. No takers. All right, a lot of this is, everybody's done a great job with a lot of detail into this, but I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to make sure I didn't miss something. Jason, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you.
Jason, are we getting into something that's going to take quite a while?
With regards to...
With your part of the presentation?
No, I just have a couple comments real quick,
Okay.
and then you can go ahead and...
Go ahead and make your comments, and then I want to take 5 minutes because these morning meetings, I'm a coffee drinker.
Sounds good.
Okay.
One of the things that I'd like to do is when we talk about the timeline, two things really. One is you saw the costs up there, and most of them are hovering up around a little bit less or a little above $12 million. And we look at that and we say, well, that still seems like a really high cost. One thing I'd like to make sure everybody realizes is when you ask someone to cost out options, they use the same filter. So when McCown Gordon's looking at those costs, they're looking at the unit rates from the same eyes on each of those. And so it's really more of an issue in that case of comparability in cost than it is simply what will the project cost at the end, whichever choice that you go with. So I want to make sure that you recognize that and reemphasize, and we can talk about it a little bit, but reemphasize the value engineering. The other thing I want to talk about is, real quick, is that this design has evolved, and John made reference earlier talking about programming and schematic. That's when you're kind of drawing out layouts for rooms and locations of things after you think about the programming and what do you want to do with the facility. And then you get into design documents. And then we had a meeting where we got really candid input from a lot of stakeholder folks about, I think, three and a half weeks ago, something like that. And at that time, it was brought to our attention and to Mike and my attention that there's still a lot of interest in certain aspects. That's where the 3.3 came in and some other aspects that truly came in to our knowledge. Now, some of that I think had been talked about before at different levels. That's fine. But that's when it came to us and they said, we really seriously want you to look at certain things. And so I said, all right, we'll look at certain things. At that stage, we're just a week from having the design development piece done. We weren't going to stop. But at the same time, we said, continue to work technically on evaluating all the aspects of the 3.3, the site, the lobby, all the stuff that you just saw. And so we've been doing that, and that's what John mentioned. We were doing that up until about 5:30 yesterday on President's Day because we knew that it was important for you to have the information. And quite honestly, we had an opportunity to gather all the technical, and we needed to really just look at it deeply and ask the million questions you need to ask, because when you really looked at it, there's a very subtle difference between the 4.2, the lowest cost 4.2 option, and the lowest cost 3.3. The 3.3B is what we called it, and that really had to do simply with the 3.3B provided a wider gym space in what we call the north building, and that really, in the end, whether you're covering 2 courts with turf or whether you think you can do 3 at some point, because that's what the removable wood court was for, is you could just leave it there the whole time. Or if later in life we feel like we can figure out how to have turf there and not interrupt any tournaments whatsoever, it gives us flexibility. Under the lowest cost 4.2, you don't have that flexibility because you just have the space around 2 courts only, so you really don't give yourself any additional flexibility. Quite honestly, a little bit, some fewer square feet, slightly lower cost, a little bit more flexibility, and in the end we said we can't think of a reason why that wouldn't be the best option if you should decide to have an enhanced lobby and some additional parking. If you don't want those 2 things, then the other options are probably worth looking more into. So anyway, that's where we came from. I wanted to let you guys know that, and I think it was important for all the stakeholder folks that have provided input to know we really did take it seriously, and we were working the whole time on that leading up to our decision.
On the 2 options, conversion time from turf to hard to the turf surface to court surfaces, are they comparable?
Well, initially we talked with manufacturers. We also talked with people who bought the turf products. There's various products. That rolled turf seems to be kind of not something we think will work very well because we've seen the quality of it isn't so hot after it's rolled in and out a lot. So the panelized turf is, we think, the best option for quality. But what we found was initially we thought it was going to be about 7-8 hours for a team of 4 to take it off of a single court. And I think now with other people we've talked to, we're down to maybe 2 or so. Now, if you have a portable court, though, you still have to take a portable wood basketball court and move it out. The issue is if you put your turf on top of a wood court, you void your warranty, and there's concerns about moisture if it's there for any time at all. Mm-hmm. So that's why we said we all, I think everybody agreed initially, 4 hardwood courts, 4 hardwood courts, 4 hardwood courts. But if you go with a 3.3, that 4th court needs to be hardwood, so we felt a portable gives us all the options available. It could be there forever that way, or if we look at the demand of the turf space, the demand of the tournament space, and the ability to switch it out, we have the ability to always have a couple courts where we can throw turf on and not mess with a typical tournament, or if we think we have time, we could put the whole area in turf as long as we know we can switch it out. So there'll be a little bit of experimentation with that, but if we went with the small 4.2 option, you're down to 2 courts of turf no matter what. At least with the 3.3, you have the option to look at it with the portable wood court. So it gives us all options, and it's a slightly lower cost. Again, with the added parking and the larger lobby, if you want to go there.
Okay.
So it's kind of hits all the pieces.
Okay. Moving on from here, are we going to go to public comment and then questions, or
that's up to you after the break. However you want to do
Okay.
that's fine, and we'll respond accordingly, and then hopefully get you to decision points before we're done.
All right, I'll think about that. We'll take 5 minutes. Thanks. Ray, give me just a minute. I need to. Okay, we're back on. Okay, what I wanted to ask, what are the things that we need to get done that you want to go through here? We want to go through building design. Want to go through some of the value engineering. Why don't we go ahead and staff through that before we hit public comment?
Okay. Yeah, the big things are obviously that we need a recommendation on the concepts. You may have questions about the various concepts, the pricing and so forth, or the estimating, which is fine, and hopefully we can help you get to the concept. You know what we're recommending, and then certainly the charter ordinance number. And that's still going to be a floating number because we're still, as I mentioned, there's actual bids on two pieces of the project, but on all the rest of it, they're just estimates based on conversations. There are not bids yet, and there won't be till later in the design process. So we have hope to optimism that even though you see an estimate at 12, it has a good contingency in it, and it has some, I'll call them probably some fluff assumptions in there because, again, they're not quite finished with the design. They don't have actual bid numbers from the subcontractors. And then, obviously, the process of getting to that is something you may have questions about as well, and we'll be happy to talk about that.
Okay. Well, why don't we hit number one then from up here? Are there questions from the commission for staff on the design options and any of the presentation we just viewed?
I attended the meeting on January 28th. That was led by our Park and Rec director, or an interim director, I guess, Steve Hardesty. And the part that really struck me, I guess, was that was when SFS was making the presentation with the city design, and then Brian Richardson offered his 3x3 design, and at the end of the meeting, there were approximately 50 people in the room probably, and there was a straw poll taken about, well, which design do you prefer? And 2 people raised their hands for the city design, and 48 people raised their hand for the 3x3 design. And so when I'm thinking design, to me, the most important element of the design is from the stakeholder. We on the commission don't really understand the design. We don't know that stuff. We leave it up to the architects and the stakeholders. And to me, what the stakeholders want, what the stakeholders think is important, is what we ought to think is important, in my mind. If you can show me a 4x2, you can show me a 3x3, and I say, well, if that's what people want, that's great.
Right, and I think just to not confuse things with a city plan and a stakeholder plan, I'll just point out that the original concept that we were presented on numerous occasions was a 4-2 plan.
Right.
So I think that the 3-3, the first time I heard about it was about a week ago, and so I don't want to characterize this as a city plan because this wasn't. We certainly had no input. I think Parks and Rec want to follow our direction, which was to say if this is going to be used for Parks and Rec purposes and maintained and staffed by Parks and Rec, let's make sure that the components of this are good. Now, moving forward, if it's a 3-3 and that's what everybody thinks is the best plan, then I think that's fine. But I think to say that somehow a 4-2 is a city plan there was never a city plan. It was always a plan that came in and evolved from the private group and then and stakeholders, which we're kind of a stakeholder, and at 50% of this thing. But I think I don't want to kind of say that one group took over the other, but I think if we're evolving into that, I think that the 3-3 came into the picture quite late in the process, and And if it's the best, let's go with it. But I don't want to characterize a city plan versus the private plan. So-
Commissioners, I might be able to help with that a little bit, because I think there was a time prior to that, I believe, the 3-3, and they can tell you, but the 3-3 as a concept came into play at some point earlier than that. We weren't involved from that perspective. There was no reason, at that point, there was no reason to believe that at my office level that we needed to be involved in micromanaging a design. It was handled by Parks and Rec Department, working with the design team and so forth. They vetted it. You have different eyes. In all honesty, it's really close when you really, and it all depends on where your value judgment is. If your value judgment is on getting as close to $9 million as possible, you don't go with the larger lobby. You don't go with the extra parking because you have plenty of parking within a block or so. You don't do that. You just go down to the lowest cost. So what really I think evolved is that there was a desire to maximize parking and lobby space, and so what happened is again we had a transition that was brought to our attention, and we looked at it openly and said, what are the assumptions behind the ideas? I very much appreciate the fact that you had 50 or 60 people that said we like this. Now we know we have almost 50,000 people in our community. We have to serve for we talk about 20 years. That's how long it'll take to pay for this in essence, but we're talking 50 years or longer, so it's a broader decision than that. There's also a straw poll about tournament versus non-tournament. We know that tournament is first, and I stated to them, and I've stated to you, tournament first always. But the thought being is that when you get that kind of input, you say, well, there's got to be something behind that, right? It doesn't just come out of nowhere. And so what that caused staff to do is to say, well, if we haven't vetted it as thoroughly as we should have before, we need to get on a horse and get it vetted ASAP so that we can then determine what the merits are behind that. And that's what we did. And that's why in the end we ended up, and it was really close, but it was about 5 o'clock yesterday where we were comparing all these options, the benefits, the detriments, the movable turf, the portable basketball court, all those things, and said, if you want more lobby space and if you like more parking on site for the convenience of having that, the 3-3B option you saw edges out all other options. The other question we ask, and certainly SFS, the designer, could speak to this, is we asked the question, well, if we end up tweaking the 4-2 a lot, which presumably we might, or looking at the redesign of a 3-3, which takes the longest to deal with, and really the question was posed, is it about 4 weeks regardless? And the answer was, yeah, probably plus or minus right in there. Longer than we'd like, but recognizing that the other question that I was asked is do we still think we can get this going, get it designed, get it under contract, and get it buttoned up in time for winter so they can work on the inside in the winter and we can stay on a good, aggressive construction time frame? The answer is yeah, we think we can still do that. So it was sort of a wash on time of design with regards to changes on a 4-2 or a 3-3, and that was a factor we had to consider. So we'd like to think that when you make that decision, certainly I think the input that you've heard, that we have heard, is very, very important, but it leads to a good technical evaluation, which we believe in the end is the basis for a decision to go with the 3-3. We're very comfortable with that. So that's how we got there, and we're very, very comfortable with that as an option.
Okay.
Number one option.
Did people just get engaged with the concept of the field house on January 28th?
I think there was more of a galvanizing of the input. So, as you know, there's a lot of ways to get input, and I wasn't there for all the steps of the early input because I don't go to every department's meetings. I don't have time to do that, so I rely on folks to manage those pieces. But I think there were times in which there was sort of a shotgun input, and you had to kind of make something of it. There were other times where it may have been more galvanized, but from my perspective, those core issues, the lobby, the parking, I think those were somewhat of a response to, hey, we can do it, and it's actually less expensive than the option we were talking about in the minds of the stakeholders, which all those things ring loud, and we say, okay, we got to look at that stuff. So I think that was more, my opinion, from the outside looking in at that stage till today, that appeared to be more galvanized. We said, oh, okay, it's not just a bunch of different opinions that you pick here or pick that one or pick this one. There's a galvanized thought on certain pieces of this that we need to look at. And that's kind of my perspective. I don't know because, I wasn't there for all the conversations.
Was the bulk of the design then between Park and Rec and SFS?
Well, yeah, you had the whole design team. I mean, you had SFS as the designer, obviously. You have McCown Gordon in the construction manager at risk process that are starting to try to put some kind of cost estimation to the options. And then you have Parks and Recreation, which is trying to look at the tournament first and also trying to look at things such as, well, program space, practice space, cost efficiencies of space, utilization. Idea is detailed is the storage room large enough, and can we move turf in and out? What are the electric costs going to be? Those types of things. And quite honestly, we looked at it, I think, we had different eyes at the end looking at it. And in the end, there wasn't a huge gap in options, but we came to the 3-3 as the most flexible option after SFS had looked at it and developed it a little bit more. There are really pretty subtle changes in there, but there's some changes in space utilization in there. They're fairly subtle, but that's what they call the developed model or the B model in front of you today. And we looked at it and we said, we can't, technically speaking, we cannot find another option. If you want more lobby space and more parking, we cannot find another option that's either we believe will be lower cost or give us more utilization than that option. So that's how we got there, really, really honing in on it.
Okay, let's click off number 1 then. Is everybody good with the 3-3 recommended design?
3-3, I'll call it 3-3B.
3-3B, is that what we're calling it?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's just, that satisfies the private group, our group, and everything. I mean, that's...
Well, I don't want to speak for them, and they'll get an opportunity here, but we believe that it addresses the lobby space, the additional parking. It's a better utilization of the lot. If for some reason, most of the times these projects, you don't see an expansion later, but if you did, you had more room to the south to take out some of that parking and add another gym. Now, technically speaking, you really should oversize your systems, your electrical, your mechanical, and so forth, if you're really, truly planning on doing that. Rarely do you see it happen, so if it would happen in the future, you do have space, you have utilization of your property that's a little better. You might have to have some standalone or some other expansion systems at that time, but it gives you a little bit of an advantage if that ever happened.
Okay.
So there's an advantage there.
Just clarification, just to be sure, on the 3B, the 2 plastic courts would always have turf on them unless needed for basketball?
Yeah, typically what would happen is you'd have the, there we go, you have the 3 courts. In this case, right would be south. Usually south is down and north is up, but in this case, with the orientation, the 3 courts in line to the right are south, the 3 courts in line the other way to the left are north. And those south 3 courts are hardwood courts, permanent hardwood courts, always there available. They will never have turf on them at this point. There's no reason. But everyone has said you got to have 4 hardwood for your basic tournament, your up to 32 team tournament. So that's why on the 3 courts to the north, one of them would be a hardwood court. But I think from our interpretation of the input, people are comfortable knowing that the 2 additional courts for the larger tournaments can be a really good quality synthetic surface. The synthetic surface allows the turf to be placed on top. The hardwood does not. So in essence, most of the time you would see the 3 permanent hardwood courts, the 1 temporary hardwood court that looks, or portable, I should say, it's not temporary, it's portable, the bicentennial type court. And those would always be out there, and you'd see turf over the 2 synthetic courts. When we had a tournament that's larger, the synthetic pieces go into storage. You've got 5 courts, 6 courts, whatever you need.
Okay. Is there any physical separation between the turf area and that 4th basketball court, so you could have simultaneous program?
Yeah, there'll be a series of curtains that separate all the areas in different ways for the various, because we have volleyball to take in consideration too. Your volleyball tournaments are hard court type tournaments as well. There may be some other things. So there's a series. It'll be designed with curtain separation, so that we can properly separate however we need to do that.
Okay, and just 2 short questions. Is the quality of the plastic court suitable for tournaments?
Our understanding is it is. I think a lot of people would say hardwood is the preferred option, but if you have 6 hardwood, you're not really going to be in a position to have any usable turf space. And so we may get some input on that, but our understanding is the expectation of everybody is to have 4 hardwood, but the other 2 with a good quality synthetic is acceptable.
Right. And did you say it would take only 2 hours to remove or replace the turf?
Yeah, the turf itself, just moving it in or moving it out, we think 4 people, 5 people, somewhere in there, a couple hours. We think based on the input we've received, we could do it in that time. I think what we'd likely do is initially we have to make a decision on the turf. First of all, we have to finalize that storage decision that was discussed. Do we really need mezzanine storage or not? The key is the storage room large enough to handle the full north building area of turf and everything else we might want to store? If it's not, we need more storage area. If it is, that's good, and it might even be big enough, and we may not even need, if you look on that drawing, on the right side of those northern 3 courts, you see some little green bars. That at one point was representative of extra space for turf storage if we needed it. If we find we don't even need that, this goes down another couple thousand square feet. But at this point, we're anticipating we probably do, but we need to finalize that in the next week.
As far as, might be a good time to identify, because what I want to kind of do is make sure that, as I said earlier, private group is good with this. Who exactly is the private group? I mean, who are we?
Well, obviously, Brian Richardson is a big part of that, and there's a lot of stakeholders. I think I'm going to guesstimate and say anywhere from 70 to 80 various stakeholders that have thoughts on that. I don't know, when we talk about private stakeholders, we really talk about it from the perspective of those that have donated, and what they do is they donate to the community foundation, so it's held for this purpose. And so that ensures that the money, private money, is there and it can be utilized for this. And so we also recognize that, just real quick on the funding piece, that of the private side, 4.5 million, that not everybody can donate it or will choose to donate all in 1 year. Usually it's over maybe 2, 3, or 4 years, somewhere in that time frame. So they're working with a local bank, so by the time we need the full resources, it's available because they can leverage the commitments and make sure that the resources are available. But in essence, we look at the stakeholders as people that have donated to it, and people that have actively been involved in any of the meetings. And I can't tell you 80 names off the top of my head, but in most all the meetings, because most of them will have kids that, or have had kids that have gone to these tournaments, and it's important to them to get this right. And so it's a loose-knit group. It's not a formally organized group.
Okay.
A lot of people are saying Salina 2020. That group is associated directly with the Star Bonds. And I can't say that there aren't people in that group that are also interested in this. I think that's true. But the stakeholder list for the field house is not a formalized group.
Okay, I think we're going to, as we move on, I think we're going to have to narrow that down and identify something, because if we do have a gap and there is an agreement put in place as to how we fund that gap, I think we're probably going to want to have some entity to make an agreement with. But that's later on in the meeting. So I have just one last question on the 3-3 here, and that is from, if we're 30% done in the construction documents on this project at the 4-2, is the only real changes then to the front lobby area and the 3 courts to the south, and does the other 2 sort of the common area and the north courts pretty much stay the same?
Well, the north court actually expands a little bit. It gets a
Okay.
little bit bigger so that we can turn those courts the other direction and get 3 of them in there. The way it was previously designed, there were room for 2 courts in that north building. So there's some minor changes to expand that building, some changes to take off the south court, and then like you said, the lobby space and multipurpose rooms. That kind of the central core area really remains as it is. So there's really
what
no
kind of
changes.
change is that in the fees,
I
like a percentage wise?
because there's been so many options out here, we haven't had a chance to really talk to each of our consultants. We have civil, we have a structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. We have a lot of consultants involved. We really need to get in front of them with what the recommended approach is, and get a detailed estimate from them, and
So if this
make
was,
sure that that's
if this was the
reasonable.
approach, how long?
We're thinking it's about 4 weeks to make the changes, an additional 4
construction
weeks of time, approximately. And again, that's something we'll have to, that's an estimate at this point, so we need to get with each of our consultants to really nail that number down, and the time. That's a rough estimate at this
Okay,
point.
One last question. Does this recommendation, the cost at the 12.5, Is the fire lane, drop-off lane, corner lot acquisition in addition to the 12.5? Or is that included in this option?
That is included.
I have one last question on the design aspect of this, and that is the enhanced exterior as an ad alternate. What's the base? I mean, is the base something similar to what Assurance Partners is, or is the base exterior a metal?
No, the base is 16 feet of masonry all the way around the three sides of the building. The east side is metal panel all the way down because it's not visible at all. So there is 16 feet of masonry on all visible sides. And then above that, there's a combination of metal panel, architectural metal panel, and glazed areas for natural lighting to come into the building.
Okay.
And that has all been approved by the DRB. That base concept was approved by the Design Review Board. So,
Okay, and I haven't seen that, and I can just express my concern is only that we're not doing something drastically different than the very nice job that was done
right.
on the corner.
That was something that was
protect their value. So
absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. That was something we looked at really closely, and the DRB also looked at is how do those buildings blend together, and, aligning materials, and so that was something.
And that would be the base and not the enhanced.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioners, the enhanced would take the masonry all the way up. That's the difference for I think it was 1.2, 1.3 million. One of the things we talked about too, and you've seen the picture that was up there at the very beginning. It's the same picture others have seen, the one that went to the Design Review Board. And just for people at home to understand, the Design Review Board's role is simply to make sure that anything built in the downtown area is compatible and we feel comfortable with it. And so it's a quick process. If we make any changes even to the base, that would change the look. Running it through the Design Review Board isn't going to be your issue on timing. It's getting design going with a focused design and other things. So we don't anticipate any issues with that. But I did talk with I don't have a good feeling from the rendering. That's just the way I am. It looks fine. It's just I can't tell if it has pop or that the feeling you get. And so we've talked with the designers about that, and also asked with metal panels on the upper part, are there options with color or shading or texture, direction, ribbed and things like that. And they indicated there's some flexibility there because we said we believe that we can have a base facade that does have pop that looks really good without having to take stone all the way up. And for some, stone isn't a lot of pop all the way up. It's just more expense. So staff really feels that the idea of the enhanced facade, the additional stone all the way up, really should be eliminated immediately. Shouldn't even be an option for consideration. We think that you'll be very comfortable with whatever the final is on the base facade.
I have one other question on the design, too. You mentioned natural lighting. I was curious, is that natural lighting filtered at all so that, you don't have direct sunlight coming in, hitting the courts, that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. We have it's a diffuse material. It's a polycarbonate panel that would diffuse the light as it comes through, because that's a very important issue, to not have glare in those court areas. So, yes.
There's a solid wall, though, between the lobby and the courts?
It does have glass so that you can see into the courts from the lobby space. It's a combination of glass and solid wall.
One of the things we want to avoid is we've got a great YMCA, and if you ever go there to watch your kids or grandkids or whomever play basketball, that is a loud place. And they do have dividing curtains between the gymnasiums, but they don't have anything else to diffuse the sound. And so we don't want it to be quite that bad, quite that loud for a tournament facility. It works great for that, for the recreational, but we would like to make sure that we try to diffuse the sound a little bit. So there's a couple of means in there to try to keep the sound at a reasonable roar.
I don't know anything about field houses. Don't have any kids to play games. But I guess I don't understand why we need turf. I think I mentioned that Timmy said it's for soccer. Well, we've got giant soccer fields out that we put in the last few years. I'm not sure why we need 3 courts on the north. I mean, I don't know. Just
Yeah, the concept that was first brought to us, and you remember the original drawing had 4 gyms in a box and 2 up to the north, and they came in with turf space. It said, in a multi-use, you could have courts, you could have turfs, you could do tournaments, you could do turf. The idea with the turf is, in a true field house, you have the court space. And again, that's why tournaments are first. I want to reiterate that, but the turf space, there's a lot of things you can do. For example, that's the practice space. You could have small kids playing little soccer games. You might even, if you have enough space, have a one larger game in there. But what it does is, it's during the colder times when you're not outside playing, it's a good opportunity. You can practice all through the season if that's what teams want to do. We're talking about softball, baseball, soccer, and on and on and on. There are a lot of turf-type sports, and so it's to give the facility the flexibility, more for practice than anything else. And that's why when we looked at it, in the end we said, okay, we need to have as much flexibility for the turf as possible, but the turf can't overcome the tournament basis for the facility. And that's what we wanted to preserve, was the tournament basis for the facility. But if you don't have any turf, you're going to lose a lot of the local programming and practice flexibility that I think a lot of the community says we've seen it in other places. We want to be able to do that, and we'd like it here. So that's why that was brought in, and that's why it's still under consideration.
Okay. What about the mezzanine, semi-enhanced, enhanced?
Yeah, I believe that the mezzanine, as presented as a place for people, should be eliminated from consideration as well. There's no way you can really fit that into the budget. And when you really think about the courts being divided by curtains, you really don't get much of a view from that mezzanine. The idea up there is you could maybe sit up there, relax, and watch a game. Well, there isn't a real good layout to do that, and so there's not a lot of value. I think if we talk about the mezzanine for storage, we just simply need to, in this next few days, make a determination as to whether or not that is essential for storage or not. If it is not, it's not built as even, and it's not. You don't have to do the whole mezzanine, by the way. I think there's about 4,000 or 5,000 square feet or something like that. For storage, you'd look at and say, what do you think you're going to need? And that's the part, in essence, you beef up structurally for that purpose. You don't just automatically go to the whole thing. I'd like to think we don't need it, but we do need to take a close look at it, because you don't want to build a facility and all of a sudden realize we don't have any place for some of this, and then you're into an operational cost to store it off-site, move it off-site. And we would compare the mezzanine cost with that little strip you see with the green bars on the north of the building to see which is the least expensive approach to storage. That's a minor design thing. It shouldn't be a big expense. But as far as the mezzanine as it's presented for a public place today, staff really thinks that that's an easy one to scrap.
Okay.
I like the larger lobby, because when those kids go in, they have been in a few places that, the bags are just everywhere. So.
Yeah, and I give credit to the original lobby. You notice it was, we won't change the picture, but on the original it was narrower towards the end, and it widened as you got towards the entry and concession stand. The primary purpose was to move people to and from the courts. And if you think about that, if you think about it, whether you're in an airport or a convention center and you're moving to your rooms, you're in that space. Well, there's not a perfect formula to figure out how many people are going to be hanging out there in between games. It all depends on time between games, other things in the community, weather. There's a lot of factors. But I think in the end there was some concern that says it works great for moving people in and out, and as you go from the far court to the next, to the next, to the next, if they're letting out at the same time, that load balances the size of the lobby. It's great. But if you then say, but there's a different space, there's that what am I doing in between, and how often will they be there space, sitting at tables or chairs or what have you, there's a lot of question as to whether that was really sufficient size for that purpose. That's a value judgment you have, but we agreed and said if we want that additional hangout space in there for people, for parents, for grandparents, for whomever, who don't want to sit in bleachers all day long, because bleachers aren't real comfortable all day long, then we needed to expand it, and that's why we agreed with that and said, here's some options for the expanded lobby. Makes sense. And also that little reconfiguration towards the entry where the concession, all that is, we think makes sense too, because you'll have vendor folks set up and all that type of thing, and so those multi-purpose rooms need to be close to where people see them, know what's in there, and otherwise if they're back behind other things, they're not really that valuable.
Mike, could you reload that, our list, or whoever's doing the... Yeah. We'll stay on that list. Hopefully we can get through our session here. I think the next thing on the list was some of the value engineering cost savings.
Yeah, we've had quite honestly, since the design development drawings have been out, we've had some pretty good input from a local contractor in particular that we take very seriously and appreciate. And we think that in the next, again, we've got to get moving on the design, but in this next few days, we'll talk about options of how you get this project done, but presuming there's not a real change there, we already have our list. We want to get everybody's thought, who truly has a thought on that design piece of anything we can do to save dollars in the final design as soon as possible, inventory it, filter it through, and see what makes sense to put in there. I'll give you an example of that. One example is that this is designed with LED lights. It's thinking more towards the future and efficiency. Well, there are very efficient fluorescent lights as well. So that was an option brought up. Well, could you consider fluorescent lights? The answer is, well, yeah, we need to look at that. Certainly, there's an operational cost, but we know, I don't know the exact cost of these lights, but we know looking at LEDs, when you just look at the cost of the return on investment to pay for the LEDs are still fairly expensive, and it takes a lot of years to do that. So it's that kind of that return on investment time frame. So that's just one example of one that said, yeah, we need to look at that and say, could we go with high in fluorescence, and does that get us where we need to be, or do we think we need to be at the LEDs? One of many examples of little things, probably in that list of 50 and beyond, that we'll need to look at immediately as we set the designers loose with the final design concept. Okay. And so I would expect to get, like I said, from anybody in the private sector, contractors, anybody that has a thought that's seen those design development drawings, or wants to just give us their unloaded list and let us work through it and finalize.
Okay, because we're at 12.5 million right now.
With contingency.
Right, with
roughly,
contingency.
yeah.
We're going to add some on design fees.
A little bit,
Well,
relatively speaking, I think.
Will it offset whatever be
Yeah.
offset by how much? How much should we anticipate we can shave off with value engineering?
Well, that's a good question. I think the contractor and the designers would typically tell you 5 to 10% is the average. I think it depends on how hard you work on those items as well. So that's typically what they say is 5 to 10%. So there's been some value engineering, but we'll value engineer every piece that's thrown at us to try to quickly to get to that point. I think then it also leads to, in the end, we have, as you know, the construction manager at risk process, right? And in that process, the whole idea is to get the construction project, the whole project team together early. The designer, usually it's just the designer, and you have design, and when it's total finished design, you get a bid or an estimate, and then you go out for bids, and then you know what the cost is once you get the bids, and then you decide to build it, rebid or whatever, and rebids take some time. In this process, you get the designer and the contractor together early, and the contractor's role is to work with the pricing and estimating throughout, and also to integrate with the design, because we want to eliminate any change orders. And so in a typical design bid build, sometimes it's, well, that was a bad design. Well, no, they didn't do that right. Well, that was unknown. Well, no, it should have been known. You get into those conversations. This avoids that, and that's the limited risk that we have. We wouldn't expect a change order unless we should say we just want something we didn't think about. That's on us. But the thing is, and then what happens is, and I think that either probably Chris or Todd may want to talk about this, but then they have a means that they actually get bids, as I mentioned earlier, in the end from the subcontractors. Okay, so the subcontractor numbers should be good competitive bids based on whatever the circumstance in the community, construction community is at the time. They're not far enough to have all those yet. So that is a factor too. That's typically the sharpest pencil comes at a bid time, not an estimating time. And so we expect there to be some variable, hopefully to the good there. But with the general contractor, that's based in contract, and there's a methodology on how that fee is determined. In the end, you have to decide, I think, is the value on this. And we took this the construction manager at risk way. You're not technically, legally hooked into that if you should choose. If you believe in the end, and I think they'd want to address the questions, but if you believe that even though this is at the estimation stage, and even though if you believe the $9 million original number still for the whole project may or may not be realistic today, it's up to you to decide that. And your variance is so broad that you want to be as conservative as possible in getting to the end result, The only way to know for sure is probably a full competitive bid process at the end. So that's a consideration you have. If the question is, can that occur legally with the way the contract is drawn up, the answer is yes, it can. Now, I would say that if you should choose to do that, we would definitely want McCown Gordon to be a bidder because we know they do a great job with construction. The Bicentennial Center is a more complicated project, but they did a great job with that. So we'd want them as well as all the local contractors, and as far as anybody's interested. If you decide that you want to give us the guidance to do that, we can bring you back in action in the next meeting or two to do that. But what we would probably recommend is pre-qualification of bidders to make sure you have folks that have done the type of work and so forth, and then we could set that up.
So does our contract with McCown Gordon get us a guaranteed maximum price?
Yes.
So we can get that, and then once we get that price, we can decide at that point whether to bid it out, or do we need to decide at some other?
You would need to decide. Really, we would need direction today, and the reason I say that is because it takes time. The designers are going to do their thing, but they have to get the design to a certain stage, and at the same time, we changed gears with our owner's rep with Fru to take us into to position us for a competitive bid process. But as we talked, and I think John might be able to address the timing from his perspective a little bit, but when we really talked about that before, we really felt that if that is the decision the governing body wants to make, we need to make that decision really soon to be properly positioned to stay on track with the timing of the project. If you wait, and then you have to create the bidding process at the end of April or maybe even early May, you're probably going to create a few weeks of delay.
Do we have recommendation from staff and or our construction rep as to pros and cons of both of those approaches?
Well, I mean, we can give you a recommendation. I think, in fairness to McCown Gordon, either Chris or Todd may want to be able to answer some questions you might have from their perspective, and then we can come back and provide our thoughts.
Okay.
And could I even rephrase part of that question? What's the difference in incentive to get the price down between the CMAR process and the competitive bidding?
Incentive, what do you mean?
To provide us with the lowest possible cost. Is there a greater incentive for one of those options as opposed to the other?
We do know a competitive bid process. You have the highest amount of competition for all aspects of the project out there, and so if you pre-qualify, you should be assured that wherever the bid is, the general contractor, any of them, and their subs, they're capable of doing a project, so you don't have a loss of confidence there. So at that point, you have the competitive process. The lowest bid you can feel in your competitive environment is the lowest number you could possibly get. That's one thing. Now, with regards to the CMAR, again, a good portion of it is bid in the internal process of that anyway, and I think Todd will allude to that and can talk a little bit more about the structure of how McCown Gordon gets paid in the CMAR process, maybe to help answer the rest of the question.
And just real quick on that process, though, are the specifications the same? Because in the process we're dealing with, we've got a team working on specifications, and so, and maybe you can answer that. I mean, is it a different spec package?
No.
Or?
The final design and specifications for the project should be the same for everyone. So, because that's what they'd build too. But go ahead, Todd.
Mm-hmm. Morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Todd Knight, McCown Gordon Construction. Want to maybe take a few steps back and talk about how we got to today. So McCown Gordon was involved in an interview process and an RFP response, request for proposal. And at that time, back in July of 2015, we presented all of our markup costs, all of our insurances, our fee percentage, what we felt the cost for general conditions would be, recommended contingencies, all of the things that you basically are paying McCown Gordon for. So at that time, it was a competitive process. We were one of several responders, and at that time, we were the most competitive responder for that portion of the work, which I'll call is the top 10%. And then the rest of the project, the 80% that the subcontractor community will perform, that is your typical competitive process. We did it the same way on the Bicentennial Center. We went out and reached out to all of the local contractors and regional contractors. from concrete to masonry to mechanical to plumbing to electrical. All of those folks will have an opportunity to competitively bid this project, and we would vet through those numbers and make sure that we are selecting the most qualified low bidder with the assistance of Fruit Development and all of our team members and city staff. So I don't want there to be any confusion that this project is not going to be competitively bid. It absolutely will be, but in the construction management process, what the benefits are is you have folks like us sitting at the table right now sharing with you our opinion of cost for said scope of work. And that scope of work may change between now and completion of design based on comments today and your recommendations. And then we, of course, have the opportunity to help communicate and reduce the cost through cost options. And those are those 50 items that we talked about earlier that we've already thought of, unique ideas and creative ways to build this project cheaper, quicker, faster, better. But at the same time, we want to make sure we are maintaining the intent, the 3x3 option, enlarged lobby, parking. Those things are sacred cows, things that we cannot adjust or modify. Okay. We so far have already communicated with roughly 20 local subcontractors who have assisted in the budgeting. So this is not just McCown-Gordon's opinion of cost. This is absolutely the subcontractors are lending a hand as well, based on the incomplete set of drawings that we have right now. So we feel that there is those numbers may be slightly conservative, but they are a good representation of cost. And the market has spoken and kind of shared with us what the values are for this specific project. And that was the 4x2 option was our basis of design that we priced and used the subcontractors to assist in those values. And then again, in the end, the other value of construction management at risk is the open book process. We will show everybody every number to communicate exactly what we have included in the value of the estimate. And then in the end, when we lock in a guaranteed maximum price, if we have any savings on the back end, those savings will be returned to the city for either reinvestment into the project, or in some cases, they may be just savings that you can put into your pockets for a rainy day some point in the future. In a hard bid scenario, I can guarantee you those contractors are going to take those savings and put them in their pocket. So if they are able to build the project cheaper, quicker, those savings would be not returned to the city. So basically, McCown-Gordon in a CM at-risk environment, our responsibility is to make sure that you are putting a dollar to every decision, and we want to make sure that you understand the current value of cost, and if there's an opportunity to save, we want to assist in that process. So I'd be open to answer any questions. And Chris, anything else?
Just one for full disclosure. Is there any fee that you would earn on savings? If let's just say saved $2 million, do you earn a fee on that?
Not at all. 100% savings back to the city.
Does FRU work with you in terms of the subcontractor bids or the bid openings or that sort of thing? Or I was thinking about the level of transparency that goes on.
Absolutely.
In the bidding process.
They are sitting in the room with us when the bids are rolling in via email and fax. And we have a bid tabulation form that allows us to compare all of the different, let's take plumbing for example. We would have all of the plumbing contractors listed across the top of the page and all of their inclusions or exclusions, and we come to a number for a complete scope. And that is the recommended contractor we would bring to the table and say, this contractor, ABC Plumbing, they have all of the scope included. Here's their final number. This is our recommendation to the city as to who we hire for the plumbing scope of work. And that process is absolutely, completely transparent. John or Keith would be sitting in our office on bid day. We call it bid day when all the subcontractor numbers roll in.
To be abundantly clear, we're simply there when they open the envelopes, and that's all. We have no role in their scoping and analyzing and recommending contractors. You have the right, and we do look at these and say, okay, give us your subs, tell us who you've received bids from, show us their numbers. We'll review all of that. And as under the contract, the city can say, for this plumbing line item, we don't want you to take that one, we want you to take the other one. And if there's a higher cost, they have to take them, the city pays the difference. That's our only role. We have no role in recommending which sub is selected or not.
Right.
Is there any weighting given to local contractors, subcontractors?
That would be up to city staff and your decision. At this point, low qualified bidder would win the project. So, and qualified means if we have a concrete contractor that typically pours driveways, they probably may not be qualified to install $1 million concrete package on something like this. So we qualify them to make sure they absolutely can perform on this type of project.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's one of the issues we needed to get to now. I think we need to talk about the gap and how we see what the potential gap is, for one thing, because I think Commissioner Ryan at the last meeting had a concern that maybe the bond authorization was a little high. So if we're able to narrow that, one thing. And the other thing is whatever that gap is anticipated to be, how are the different options of filling that gap?
Sure. First of all, let me go back to the last conversation and let you know that this is in no way to disparage McCown and Gordon, because there's no reason for me to do that. They've been great to work with. But the only way that I can say you're guaranteed the most competitive price for all aspects of the project would be through a competitive bid. That's the only way I can do that. So if you're looking for a guarantee, that's the only way I can really say that there's a guarantee. If you're comfortable with the process, and we've used it before and have been comfortable with it, that's perfectly fine too. But if you really need to know the most competitive process to know in the end, that's really the only way I can say that we could guarantee that.
Should have competitive bids.
Is there any reason not to have competitive bidding?
There are a lot of reasons not to, but in the end, I can't guarantee you the most competitive price. I can't say competitive bid would be less than. First of all, we're working off estimates again. I still think we'd expect this number to come down with the sub bidding when they finish that process in a few weeks. So there's no guarantee that a competitive bid process will actually get you a lower cost facility that you choose. There is no guarantee. But if you want to guarantee that you have the most competitive process, that would be the process you would choose.
Okay.
So that's where we are. That's really where we are with that, and that's why you need.
So
you want
a
contemplate
decision on that too. So do you want that made through the motion, or do you want that made on a consensus basis?
I would think that a motion, what would have to, for that to occur, we need to bring you back a formal action.
Okay.
So I think a consensus basis is fine to say, staff, can you bring us back a follow-up action to give us the formal choice on that? That would be fine. And then we would do that at your next regular meeting, probably on the next regular meeting.
You guys want to knock that out now, or do you want to wait till the end?
Let's do it.
Okay. What's the thought of the board on that?
I like the idea of competitive bidding.
I do as well.
I'm fine with the CAMR, and if the competitive bid is where we're
Well,
going,
they'll
then that's
bid too.
fine.
That's fine,
Mhm.
Okay.
yeah.
So is there
Alright.
consensus to ask us to bring back an action so you can formally consider a competitive bid process for the construction of the facility? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I'll go back, just want to make sure my notes are correct. Is there consensus at this point to ask the designer to focus on what we call the 3x3B option design concept that we've talked about today?
Yeah.
Everybody, yeah,
I think
okay.
it is.
Okay, so now I think we can focus in on, at this point, the charter ordinance, the number, the gap you mentioned, Mayor. As you look at the numbers today, you have about 450,000 in contingency there. And again, I would expect that if you do use, that number will come down regardless of which process. It'll come down some. I cannot predict how much, and neither can they, because they're not finished with the work. So right now, if again, working off of 9 million, which is the budget that you set based on what was provided, you're off about 3 million, say roughly about 3 million. If you want to presume the contingency won't be used, you're probably off about 2.6, somewhere in there. The safest place to be with the charter ordinance would be to make that presumption, even though we think that that price variable could come down. And I'll talk about that charter ordinance again. The charter ordinance doesn't in any way obligate anything to the project. It just gives you the ability to to start the construction of the project without compromising the general fund if the total cost of the total project should exceed $9 million. That's the first thing. And at the time that the design is finished, and let's just make an assumption, whether it's the guaranteed maximum price or the competitive bid number, at that time we have that, you would expect that we have clarity on, if there is a gap, of how to fill the gap, for sure, before you say, let's go build it. Okay? That's what we're continuing to work on. We do believe that we're very optimistic about new market tax credits. We cannot tell you that for sure that we will be able to have that as a funding option yet, but we're continuing. Mike's working hard on that, and we are very optimistic about that. We know that depending on what the state legislature does, we had bad news a few days ago and good news today, but they'll still likely make some changes to the Star Bond law. We're not sure, based on the origin of why they did what they did, that will affect us, but you never know when you open up the can what comes out of it. So we don't know, but we're going to assume right now that if you have the capacity, some capacity at least, in what would be a Star Bond plan, it's not finished yet, and we're not really able to talk a lot about that right now, but if you have capacity and you're comfortable with that is an eligible means to fund part or all of the gap as well. So you have two options that are running in there. The other option would be whether or not, as a city, you'd feel like, depending on what the gap is, you'd want to fund it and enhance the debt service later, obviously, or whether you feel the private sector, you're going to ask them to raise more money within the 4.5, or a combination of some 50-50 or whatever it might be. So those are the options that we're aware of right now to fill the gap, and we think those will materialize as you get closer. But if you have specific direction, we know you want us to try to lock up new market tax credits if we can, unless we come across a reason that's not a good idea, and we haven't come across that yet. So we're doing that.
That'll still leave us short.
It could. That's a couple. We're guesstimating at this point that's somewhere probably between $2 million, maybe $2.25 million, maybe $2.5 million at the very high end. So if you're in the 11 range total project, that might get you there. It might be a little bit short. But it's a pretty good chunk of it at that point if we can do that. But I'd like to think that by the time you have the decision in front of you to construct, that we will have a firm answer on that, and you'll know where you stand with that for sure. On the Star Bonds, we may not quite know that. I'd like to think that we'll have the state, a response we'll have a plan submitted and a state response to the plan that's positive. And we'll at least know what the Department of Commerce thinks with regards to the total amount of bonds and how it fits into the picture. So I think both of those will be in place. That doesn't necessarily dictate the actual amount of bonds that could be issued, but it gets you a lot closer. So I think we'll have those things. And certainly, the thought being is if you aren't happy with the cost at the end and/or the ability to fill the gap, you're not obligated, technically speaking, legally speaking. We know community-wise, you probably feel pretty obligated and understand that. But that's where we would be. So when we think about the charter ordinance, I would probably, the thing is that if there's any gap at the time of construction, even if you have a plan, even if we know for sure we can use Star Bonds or we know for sure we can use new markets, but the cash will not be in hand at the date that you want to start construction and you encumber that construction cost, you still compromise the general fund. And so the charter, and then so the option, say if we don't want to encumber the cash in our general fund, which you don't, we issue typically with projects, we always issue temporary notes, right? That funds the construction. Then when you're at the end and we know the total cost, change orders, which you wouldn't expect any, but whatever that is, then we issue bonds after that. So in that case, if we do at that point have a means to fill the gap, whatever discretion you give yourself in charter ordinance now, it's just to, in essence, legally cash flow until you have cash from your other gap funding options in hand. Mm-hmm. So it just helps you transition the project. Okay. If we can't fill the gap, whatever it is, then there's a question as to whether you would choose to use that and increase the debt for the project at the time. But we just don't know the answer until we get closer to that time.
Okay. Just any
one question, yeah. I wrote this out early this morning, so I wouldn't have to do this on the fly. But if the gap must be financed by the private donors and the city, what organizational structure of private donors does the city negotiate with to decide how much each group should contribute?
I don't know that there is an organizational structure with the private donors to do that for this particular project. Now, they could stand up and say that they could create one or possibly, but I think what it'll amount to is if, first of all, if there's an expectation, well, let me back up. Right now, we have a commitment of $4.5 million on the assumption of a $9 million project. I think if you, some of you recall, I can't remember, Commissioner Davis, if you were in the earlier conversations. I don't think you were, but initially the project was brought to us with a $9 million budget, and there was a request for the city to put in 2/3 and the private sector to put in 1/3. And you responded and said, we very much appreciate that. We'd like you to see if you can stretch to 50-50. And I think they were at the time a little worried about that. But they went out, talked to people, and they were able to commit to the 50-50 to 4.5. Quite honestly, when you look at private sector donations in the community, we have things that are ongoing all the time. We have Arts Center, Stiefel Theater, we have our own the community theater. We have Arts and Humanities. Those are things all the time. And then we have projects. You know, we're museum project right now. There's usually multiple fundraising activities going on, whether it be for operational purposes or programmatic or for buildings and enhancements. And this community steps up and does it. I'll just have to say, I give them a lot of credit. They do a heck of a job. I've never seen it any higher in any community I've ever been in, and I'm very proud of that. However, 4.5, I don't know if I can think of one where that much or more was raised. So that's a big number. And I'm not going to say that there aren't people that can't do it. I can't say that. But that's a lot for a single project at any given time. And I just think realistically it is. So I don't know that it's unreasonable to, if you wanted to ask the private sector, whomever that might be, to step up. That's not an unreasonable request. But when we think about the reasonableness of whether that can actually happen, I don't know. That's not a question I can answer. It could be a very, very difficult challenge in a fairly short time frame. So I don't know the answer to that. So, you know, that's kind of where we are with that. Again, our objective would be to bring that cost as low as we can and minimize the gap and really to see if we can use the new markets, see if there's a chance of using it, even some star bonds. And I consider those sort of neutral cost reductions that don't just bring the whole thing down, and you might not even have a gap. But we just don't know the answer right now.
Okay.
I, for one, don't agree that the private parties should be asked to fund any gap. They came with a great proposal and $4.5 million as a gift. So if we could put $12.5 million on this project, where would the bond have to be? Or bonding ordinance need to be?
3.5 would have to be 8.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the charter ordinance would be for 8, for your 4.5 you have, and then the gap difference would be 8. I'd feel pretty comfortable. I think, given what we know now, between 7.2 and 7.5 should be a pretty comfortable place if we don't expect costs to go up. I'd probably defer to John Frew a little bit on that, but 7.5 is gets you, in essence, if you presume it's going to be right at about 12. But we do have contingencies. We do expect, we still have bidding in either process. We have bidding that occur. You kind of expect that to hopefully bring it down some. So that 7.2 to 7.5 is sort of a range just based on what we know today. I'm not saying that's where I'd like it to be or expect it to be even, but just on what we know today, somewhere in that range I think would be a pretty reasonable place.
Okay.
So if we were in that range, we would be responding to the community's concerns about our prudence, but we'd still have some other options to exercise if we don't like the numbers going forward.
I would say, again, for the purposes of the transition, timing and all that, the prudence question is left to be seen at the time that we really know the cost and we really know what gap filling mechanisms we have other than tax dollars. That's really where the rubber hits the road right there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're eating up time. We're at a point now where we can do public comment. County commissioners, most of them except for Commissioner Smith, have looked like they've left the room. I'd like to go up and get some time from Chairman Shadwick. So if we can take 5 minutes, I'm going to go arrange for a little more time if we can, and just to be able to take 5 to take notes, collect our thoughts, and do whatever. So we'll take a 5-minute recess.
think, yeah.
Okay, we're going to get rolling again, so if everybody can find their seat, I'd appreciate it. Okay, we're back from our recess,
I'm very
and
dry, but if I drink.
I'd just like to thank Chairman Shadwick and the rest of the Saline County Commission for moving their meeting to their upstairs chamber so we can use the room at take all the time that we're going to need to work through this. So very appreciative of their flexibility. Okay, so I think we were ready to move into public comment, and then what we'll do is we'll take public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the commission. I'm sure we're going to have some questions back and forth. Part of this public comment, if we can, though, if there was anything in this presentation thus far that some of the private groups could get up and speak to, that would be a great benefit to us. So thank you in advance for that. And I will just say that we are on a 3-minute public comment, and I'll keep time, but I'll allow you to go over and as long as you're not repeating your comments and everything else. So I'm sure everybody knows time is of the essence here. So we'll go ahead and get started on public comment, and just your name and address, please.
Good morning. My name is Jim Vint, and I live at 1115 Andrew Avenue, our Fair City. Mayor and Commissioners, I appreciate and agree with your efforts to build the downtown field house. I think we ought to do it. And I thank you for your thoughtful approach to funding the field house. Last week, a statement was made to the effect that, quote, this is a deliberative body. Webster writes, deliberate is applied to what is done not hastily, but rather with full realization of what one is doing. Exhortations of haste are jejune, and you are commended for treating them as such. Thank you for requiring that a real plan be presented to you for your consideration. For example, we need to know precisely and accurately who from the private sector is putting up millions of dollars to match the taxpayers' funds, or even how much is it? Are they going to be able to raise $5 million? I urge you to vote no on the second reading of this proposal before you, because we just haven't been given the information we need yet on this private money sector. The logistical plan, the physical plan looks great. The financial plan sounds like the tooth fairy hypothesis to me. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vint. I knew this wasn't going to work. Okay, that's good.
Norman Mantle, Salina, Kansas. Until you see that $4.5 million in an account and leave it there for however long you need to do it, you better get your money tied up first. This sounds like playing the stock market. Well, you sell the rumors and buy the facts. So show me the money first. Then the city commission can move forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think that that's always been a part of the arrangement with the private group, was to have that before we bond. So
Yeah, there's commitment for that to be there. Otherwise, we wouldn't expect you to award a project later. So with the 4.5 at least, we think you're solid, very solid.
okay, thank you, Norman.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I'm Pat Beatty, 14 Crestview. Just a couple points that I would make. I believe we should pursue the competitive bid process. That's just my opinion, that's the way we'll come up with the best cost on this, and that a general contractor will more than likely bring a group of subs and come up with the most competitive bid rather than the CMAR, which may be more of a hodgepodge of subcontractors where maybe not everybody's bringing their A subs to the game to come up with the lowest cost. I do think that the new market tax credits are a real possibility here. I think we brought this idea with our experience with tax credits to the table. I believe that will be a realistic way to fill the gap. The other is the STAR bonds, and again, we're still kind of waiting to find out. But I think in April we'll know better in both regards. So. I do like for the first time seeing the 3-3 plan. I really do like what the design team has brought to us, and I think we finally got some common ground, and I think we're pretty close to figuring it out. And I urge you to move to the next procedural step, and we can keep doing our due diligence along the way.
Okay.
So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Beatty.
Ray Ruska, 235 North Santa Fe. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you guys got a hot potato. I don't know how you can get rid of it, but somebody's going to have to throw it. The issue about the donor list, that's been brought up more than a few times. There is concern, has been shown, about the donor list, who is it and who they are, where the money is, and we could probably get that question answered, whether that information is going to be released from Mr. Brian Richardson. Now, I think he's in the audience. Are you here, Brian, yet?
We'll go ahead and...
So I would ask or request that he provide that list of the 70, which Jason Gage just mentioned, of the people that donated to that list. Now, that doesn't seem out of the ordinary to provide that because it's taxpayer supported. If they want being anonymous in this case, it does not apply because when Brian Richardson got up recently and said, we got all the money, when he made that comment in an open public meeting, that made that information subject to Kansas Open Records Act. Now, I'm just pointing that point out. There's a lot to digest here, and there sure seems to be a lot of oligarchs that are proponents to convince the public to buy into this project here. There's a lot of conjecture going on here and not enough information. What's wrong with this deal? It's called hurry, 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 buy, buy, buy. Sounds like smoke and mirrors. Maybe it's a crystal ball. Maybe that's how you're going to predict this is all going to happen. I would suggest that the commission has the ability to stop this boondoggle before it gets worse. In other words, get rid of that hot potato and either start over or stop, because there's too many things going on that nobody has answers for. And I would repeat my final request here that Mr. Brian Richard provide that information for the public.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruska. I wasn't aware that was an anonymous list. Is that list anonymous?
I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Okay.
I can answer one question, and I really would appreciate when people listen to what's said, but I didn't say there were 70 donors. I said there were, to my knowledge, at least 70 what we call stakeholders, some of which are probably donors, some of which are just simply interested in that type of facility.
Might be downtown property owners.
Very well could be. People take their kids to tournaments, so forth.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, Jason. I just pointed out what you said. What I interpreted.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thanks. Okay, I was assuming you were.
Thank you.
Were you done? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Judy Larson, 2801 Ray Avenue. I was asked to ask you something. But I had a conflict this morning, so I was late. So if you've already answered this, I'm sorry, But I was asked by two different people, how many cars are you going to park over there? And I don't drive anymore, so it doesn't matter to me. But there's a couple people would like to know what the parking strategy or placement is going to be. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Depending on the option you choose, I think anywhere from about 20 or so to upwards of 70 or more, and that doesn't count the parking lot that's that's owned by Assurance Partners, of which we have an agreement, thanks to them, to be able to use that on the weekends and evenings during the weekday.
Well, and that was the number I wrote down as they said 84, and I wasn't sure if that included Assurance Partners or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think actually it does. I think that number is probably pretty close to accurate.
Okay.
And final design you'll have, but it's in that range, up to in that range. The other thing is within a block, I think that it was brought by staff, they looked at that. There's between 400 and 500 spaces within a one block walk as well. And then two block walk, I think you're over 500 to 600 spaces. So when we think about it from the perspective of mall parking or big box retail parking, that type of thing, we're in pretty good shape, although I think it sounds like everyone agrees the more parking you can get on the site, the better, the more convenient it'll be.
Okay. What's required, about 300? 300 or 400 for that?
From a zoning perspective, on-site parking is not required in the C4 district.
Right, but I mean, if it weren't, like, what would be a realistic parking demand for that 300 cars? Do buses show up, vans?
Yeah, I don't know that number. We could apply the zoning parking requirements, but we haven't done that calculation.
If you just use, say, one car per family per player, it depends on the size of the tournament. If you're at a four-court, if you're maxing out your four courts with 32-team tournament, that's about 320, 350 cars probably. So from there, probably up to the 500 to 600 range.
It's not in the 700,000-800,000 range where we'd be probably needing to build an additional structure.
Yeah, at this point, well, we're not at this point planning to do that. So I think we'd have to see what the load really would be. But we believe that we have the ability to distribute the cars within the current parking spaces in the downtown and still be have a reasonable distance from the facility.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Maybe the question was referring to. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Morning, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Brian Richardson, 519 South Santa Fe. Appreciate the conversation this morning and certainly appreciated meeting yesterday with Keith and John with Fruit Construction. I think it was a great conversation, and some of those fruits were showed to you this morning with the modified 3.3. So I stand before you today with excitement on what we're seeing and some things that have been done there, but certainly just to answer any questions that you guys might have of me.
Okay. Just as we had a couple of things that had come up before, questions for the private group, and being that you kind of quarterback this field house. On the 3.3, the 3.3B looks like something that the stakeholders would be pleased with, and there's no hiccups moving forward. That would be a clear sale.
I think what we're seeing today is a great next step. I think there's still a couple of minor tweaks with 2 foot here or 4 foot here, but those are things that John and I have talked about, and I think there's certainly, it's there. I think the stakeholders would be happy with that product.
Okay. And then the question that was asked by Commissioner Davis earlier about the gap funding, any participation from the private fundraising group? I know you're a big part of that.
I am, and I think, again, until we know exactly what that looks like, we're going to have to go back to that group and find out if there's a willingness and what that arrangement may be. But.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? No one else.
Can we ask a second question?
Sure. But please keep it brief. We're on borrowed time here.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. The funding. We already kind of figured out the funding here is what it's going to cost. And the question I had was, the price is never what you say it's going to be. It always goes up. And that's my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll bring it back up to the commission for any further questions for staff and discussion amongst ourselves, and then we'll entertain a motion.
Do have one question for either the city manager or the city attorney. If the commission wanted to change the amount in Charter Ordinance 39, can that be done during the second reading? If it's a lower amount, the logical assumption would be if we would have approved the higher amount on the first time, we probably would approve a lower amount the second time. But does that require a new first reading, or can that be done at the second reading?
The second reading could occur with a lower amount today, if that is your wish. I mentioned that last time and have had opportunity to confirm that. This is one of those areas where my opinion is of interest, but bond counsel's is more important. And confirmed with Gina Rekoff, with Gilmore and Bell, that she is of the same opinion, that an equal or lesser amount on second reading today would be, or at whatever time you might wish, would be appropriate, so that your first reading would stand and second reading would be the final action necessary.
Thank you.
Well, I believe I've heard the number 7.5, so I'd be in favor of lowering the bond ordinance for the field house from the 9.5 to 7.5, with the city manager's nodding of his head to me.
Is that a motion?
Well,
or is it
go
time
ahead
for that?
and another comment
Just
on
comment,
that.
sorry.
That'll be open for a motion when we're ready.
Mayor and Commissioners, if I may, at whatever point in your proceedings that would seem to be in order, I think you would want to make, your first reading stands. You're now ready for a main motion that would address the second reading. That main motion could include a modification of what is Section 2, Subpoint 4, in whatever amount you might choose. So I would suggest that if and when you get to that point, that a main motion be made stating the amended section and inserting whatever amount is proposed on second reading.
When you said earlier that, and earlier today and in other meetings, and it goes for any bonding, of course, is that the price isn't set until the time we vote on the bonds or the total price of the project to move forward.
Right, it's the time that you would authorize the construction.
Okay.
Is when we would know.
At that point, that's a simple majority. That's a 3-2 vote. I mean, that's just like anything else. Okay. And then I've got a few other questions, and my big question keeps coming around the gap funding, because I mean that really is where all the what ifs are. Because if I've kind of gone through the exercise in my head of it'd be nice to clarify how we want to view that progressing. I mean, do we want to say number 1, new market tax credits, 2, star bonds, a reimbursement, or however that might have to work, because I'm sure they're not going to be ready and available at that time. And at that time, I'm assuming that is something that would be retroactive.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the what if is that if neither one of those is sufficient for a gap, that our pay for now is identified and I mean, we've identified the source for how we pay for that fund? I mean, we're trying not to raise property taxes.
Right, yeah, you have, obviously, first of all, I think it would be good for you to assert to staff, one, please try, if we can, to make new market tax credits happen. And two, you'll have a role as we look forward in the project plan for the STAR bonds, but at least acknowledging as an option, hoping we get new market tax credits as a first option, that at least there's a acceptance, possibly using some proceeds from STAR bonds as a reimbursement back to help cover the cost of some of the gap that might be left. I don't think that means all of it because we don't know what it is, but at least open to that. And then the last is at this point, you're correct. The question is how is, if there's a gap, how is it funded beyond that? And if you have an agreed upon thought on that, it's never too early to at least express what that is, just so everybody knows what the parameters are. But like I said, our objective as well, and I think you could assert this if you'd like, but we already know we're working on it, is to bring the cost of the facility down as much as we still possibly can between this time in the design to the final construction document phase and then into the GMP bidding and so forth, in order to get you the lowest cost facility that meets your needs under the 3.3B option. So we are working into that as well, but certainly we could assert that.
And the reason I bring that up is because when I go back to the original agreement of being 50-50, 4.5, 4.5, those decisions were kind of based on the desire that we wouldn't have to raise property taxes.
Yes.
To be able to do that.
Yeah, the presumption at the time, I think if we go back, there's a commission report, and I can't remember the date on it, it's been a while back, but if you go back and read that, what you'll see in there's a paragraph, and what it speaks to is it speaks to a presumption that by the time you finish, at that time we were talking about procuring the designer, and then you have the design phase, and then you go through award and the construction phase, and you're really 2 to 3 years out by the time bonds might actually hit the pocketbook, the payment on bonds, somewhere in that time frame. And the expectation and hope is that at that point, your current sales tax expires in early 2019. So whether it's the sales tax proposal that's out there for May, late April, early May right now, or that doesn't make it, you may do something different, I don't know, but if there's an expectation and hope that with the street needs, the other needs, and so forth, that if you have the ability to pay for the debt service and the sales tax, that's great. It's a great option. It's better for everybody, the public included. And if not, then the question will be, if for some reason that's not there, the question will be, can the general fund budget absorb $320 to, I'm going to say $400, maybe $450,000 in debt service? And 2 years ago, I would have told you for sure no at that time. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that time in our financial position, now our financial position has gradually become stronger, which was the goal of the governing body, so we've been able to do that. Today, if we were going to absorb it, I'd say, if we said we had to do it next year, for example, I'd say, maybe, maybe not, closer, much better, not sure I could say. And so when we look out to, say, 2018 or 19, we can't say for sure what our strength of our general fund would be and if we could absorb it. I'd say our odds are better than I would have said, a couple of years ago, but we just don't know until we get closer. If we can't absorb it, if you don't have sales tax in any form that you can use, if you don't have the ability to absorb it in the general fund, obviously at that point you would be to a point of saying, well, are we going to have to raise taxes to pay for that?
Right.
That's and I know from your guidance before, that's the last alternative.
Well, I know, and I mean, and the landscape has changed a little bit too with the property tax lid now, that we could run up against the ceiling on that, and then
possibly.
And
yes.
I mean, I don't like to be the downer, but I kind of like to know what I want to know what the downside, what worst case scenario is. We run up against the tax lid. We have to fund this thing through the general fund, is what you're saying, somehow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that 350 to 400 is based on the 4.5 or a 7.5?
Well, I think we estimated somewhere around 320 for a 4.5 amount. So you can kind of go up to there if you did. If we're talking about another 2, that's 2/3, you're pushing upwards of high fours, maybe 500,000, somewhere in there. So it all depends on the final number and if there's any gap filling mechanism and what that gap would actually be that's left to you at that time. Now, I do say that when we talk about taxes, there's always a way to absorb. And what I mean by that is when you budget each year, you're weighing everything and you decide what's a priority, what's important to you. So you always have the opportunity to cut something and make room for something else. Doesn't mean it's painless by any means. Certainly that opportunity to be in front of you as well at that time, if there is no other means.
Okay, I caught the email from you last night on the update on the STAR bonds. What, to the best of anyone's knowledge, where are we on the STAR bonds?
Well, just the really, are you talking about the legislative piece?
Yeah.
Okay. The real quick, what has happened is that the Senate went to approve their budget. It was the motion on the floor of the Senate, and a Senator Denning, I believe, provided an amendment to the motion that would, we're interpreting, I'm going to paraphrase this, in essence would mean that if you don't have the STAR bonds issued by the end of June for 2 years, you're not going to get an opportunity to do that. And that amendment passed with the motion, passed the amendment, and then the motion for the budget passed. And so that was bad news, because they have issues with STAR bonds that I don't believe has anything to do whatsoever with our project or any aspect of our project. It's a Kansas City issue. But sometimes you get caught in the net. What happened yesterday is the House had already approved their budget without any issues like that, and they have to go to conference committee. Now, the conference committee, they worked out and said that that's no longer going to be an issue, or at least an issue that's going to affect our project or other projects in the TIL at this point in time. Now, they still have legislative time left, so that doesn't mean that's 100% for sure thing. But it's very, very positive and optimistic, and we think hopefully puts us back where we wanted to be. However, the concerns that they do have about STAR bonds, they likely will try to attack sometime this year. We don't know if they'll end up having to be able to do that or not. And again, while the concern that they appear to have, or concerns with certain other projects, is limited to that, who knows when the conversation opens up where they'll go, with regards to the STAR bond law. So you can't anticipate in the end whether something could still hurt you or not hurt you. That's why we think as quickly as we can move our process and get going, the better, and then at least get the Department of Commerce engaged. So that's sort of I think the environment right now legislatively that we're in.
Okay.
Mayor, Commissioners, just publicly wanted to say the County Commission will have their meeting at 11 o'clock, but it'll be up in room 209, and we just wanted to make sure the public knew that.
Okay.
So good luck this morning.
Is there a sign on the door or anything
Yes,
that says
there
that?
is.
Okay, I
Mhm. noticed
that. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, thanks again for your flexibility. We
You
appreciate
betcha.
it.
Better you than me.
Yeah.
Two questions sort of related to that. What's more likely to occur, having to sign a construction, occur first? Having to sign the construction contract, or knowing if the new market tax credits and STAR bonds would be available?
Well, Mike's been running he's been taking the lead role in the new market tax credits. I might defer to him. I think we should know if we're going to get new market tax credits before you need to make a decision in April, May of construction of the building, but I'll turn to Mike and make sure that's accurate.
The investor group that we're in contact with has regular board meetings, and so they had a board meeting and had additional information that they requested. We had a conversation with them, provided that information, and it sounded like their board meeting schedule was a little flexible. They speculated it would probably be another couple weeks before they met again. So my understanding is they will take up the information we provided in a week or two and either take action at that time, or they may get back with us with additional requests for information. But I would expect that it's moving quickly on their part. They're on a 2015 deadline as well, and they're looking for a project that can commence construction. So I think they're motivated, and I have every reason to believe that they would make the decision before we would be considering the construction contract.
What was the original amount that could have been raised on this? Was it around $2.5 million? And the reason I ask the question is that if the actual cost of construction has gone up $2.5 million, is there more funds available?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a two-part question. One, the conversation we had, all the math that we did was based on the project at $9 million. And so mathematically, the tax credit could go up, but it's also a function of how many tax credits the allocatee was awarded and how many they have left. And so my understanding is they're trying to use up the remaining tax credit. So even if our project budget went up, I don't think their allocation and their tax credits would increase above the amount that they've got. Additionally, then, SB Friedman has identified a second small amount of tax credits that another investor has that they might want to partner with our project. But everything they've said, top end is the $2 million range.
They have all the
The top
assumptions
end
behind they have all the assumptions behind the project as well, and they seem to be very positive about the community impact that they believe the project can create for us, and that's a big part of that.
So we're still in the range of $1 million to $1.5 million gap if we get the new markets.
Yes. The one point that I would point out, in terms of talking about the new markets tax credits and the STAR bonds, the STAR bonds have the potential to fund the entire gap without new markets tax credits at all. Conversely, new markets tax credits are probably topped out in that $2 million range and would leave a $1 million gap still.
Yeah, that assumes you stay at 12. I really am pretty optimistic that number's going to be lower when you get to the real price. Whether it be less than 11, I don't know, but I think somewhere around 11 that's where if I'm going to gamble, that's where I'm going to say I think it will end up, but it's hard to tell still. I don't want to tell you that and mislead you.
Can the written plan for use of the STAR bond receipts be changed to reflect that the gap for the field house would necessarily be priority number one? I may not have worded that quite the way I should. I know there are a lot of uses for the STAR bond.
Yeah. At this point, I don't think it will matter, and obviously we're in the development phase of the plan and hoping to submit to Commerce at some point here soon, but I don't think it will matter at this point because I think that, first of all, the plan is your plan, and they'll need to prove that, and we need to get their perspectives of the plan. But in the final plan, you'll have what happens is you have a plan, and then later you get into the projects. Well, the plan is based on project estimates. None of the projects are exactly what those are. So there's flexibility with this line item. I'm just going to make up in a vacuum a different project and say, okay, you've got a developer and you've got 2-3 main pieces to the project, and if piece A doesn't cost as much as everybody thought, but piece C costs a little bit more, you typically have flexibility to balance that out. So I think that will fall more to your discretion in the administration of it than anything else, unless there's a significant difference in what the plan actually shows. You wouldn't want to say, hey, we want to increase for PC, but PC was never in the plan. So as long as it's in the plan, as long as the project's in the plan, you're going to have some flexibility with that. So we think that's something that you can probably dictate unless there's a tremendous shift. So it's really a policy emphasis of you and implementation of that, depending on where you're at and what you need.
This body would be making that decision.
Yeah, you'll have flexibility in that decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Is it likely that that they won't approve STAR bonds for the streetscape?
We have no idea. It's our first one, is why. I think you have seen them with streetscapes, so I don't know that I would say that no. In the end, I can only tell you what I know, which is not much on this in the sense that, because we haven't done one, but they obviously look at fulfilling their objectives, the tourism objectives and so forth, and they expect in the plan that all of the things that we're asking for to happen in the downtown are supported by their objectives, and they'll look at the strength of that support, and they'll make a decision and give us some feedback before you have to deal with anything final, I believe. So I don't think you'll get any big surprises. I think I'm speculating that you'll get some kind of feedback, and there'll be some refinement opportunity, and then you'll know.
And maybe I'm just building on the question that Dr. Davis is asking and maybe getting at, and that is that we've heard anywhere from $50 to $140 or $150 million private investment, or maybe that's $150 million project total and $110 to $120 million private. Does that sound about?
I think that's closer to the numbers I remember.
Yeah, I think some of that's going to be STAR bonds, but what I think the commissioner was getting at was, what can we expect that a future tab down the road will be for the city if we have to do a streetscape or any other improvements that are in addition to that? Is there any range that we know of? I mean,
It all depends on if you're looking at full reconstruction of Santa Fe, and if we are, and I think that's something that's been talked about, I'm going to say you're probably between on the very, very low end 8 or 9 million, on the high end 12 to 14 million. Again, at this stage, you can't expect someone to draw a picture and give you a good estimate, so that's why it's a pretty big range. But I would say somewhere in there for a full, complete makeover.
Well, they've got quite a bit done on it. I mean, it looks nice what they've done.
Yeah.
They're meeting as we meet, they meet. So, okay, I think that was just sort of the general question, and I think a lot of people have that question as well. So, okay, well, have we also determined in the cost? I mean, as far as the public, if we're getting away from a 50-50, does it matter how much the value of the public parking lot and restrooms were, and how much the value of moving the sewer and water line are?
I think it matters. I think all cost-related items matter, and for you, it's how it matters to a consensus or a majority, at least, of you. But everything with the project, as you know, has a cost to it, and it's about the value of the item and weighing that against the cost. So I think all things matter. It's just really how it matters to you.
Okay, because it wasn't listed in any of the.
No,
charts that were on
and quite honestly, you can look at specifically. You can look at the utility relocation a lot of different ways. We know that the utilities went through the middle of the lot and has to be relocated for the project. But we also know that the water, for example, that's a very, very old water line, and it gives an opportunity. Part of the cost is to enhance the fire protection in the downtown, on the back side of a lot of the buildings on Santa Fe, and of course those on 5th Street. So you can look at it a lot of different ways. You could look at it as simply the first of a utility project that complements the whole star bond approach as well. There's many ways you can look at it, and it's really up to how you guys really want to look at it. And I remember when we talked about it before, we kind of said on the anticipation we thought it might go over 9. We said, well, it might not matter in the end, because what really might matter is where the project ends up and what's your priority with the project. So the allocation of that may or may not matter, but you can look at it a lot of different ways, and it's really what you agree to as to how you want to look at it.
I agree with the city manager. I'm optimistic that the number will come in lower than what we're looking at right now, just based on some cursory kind of research I've done. But going and talk about the utilities too briefly. I look at it as economic development. I look at it as maybe new business, where if someone came to us and asked, well, we're going to bring business to town, would you move the utilities or carry the utilities to our location, would probably do it without really blinking. And in my mind, this is part of a process I don't consider it to be an expense, I consider it to be an investment. And I think that, the amount's large. It's not like we're just splitting hairs here, but I think it's for a good cause in the end.
Well, I asked the question mainly because I know that utilities are covered under the star bonds, and if we're looking at being able to reimburse ourselves for the utilities, I'm sure that there are other places we can use 700 or not, and I don't even expect the full 750. I just figure you could prorate out a portion that could say maybe 100,000. I just know that our utility funds and our infrastructure funds certainly could use that money, and I'd like to see that used for what it was supposed to be used for. 'Cause quite frankly, if it was a private development, we'd just go down the alley with it as it was. We wouldn't even move it. So we may replace them. So there is cost for replacement, which is probably the lion's share of the cost. But the relocation, I think, has some costs.
Sure.
If we could recoup, I'd like that to be recouped.
Yeah, I can say when it comes back to the recouping through the star bonds, we're still a little early in that plan, and really that review of the financial assumptions and bonding and all that stuff, the detailed financial piece. It's a little early to say what we might have. Certainly, as it relates to that project, which is part of the district, they would be eligible. There's no question about that. And we know that we have That's a piece. We expect probably potentially 3 other utility projects to complement other projects that are to be done in there. So in the end, I think there's some flexibility to look at it, but it's going to have to do with the total bonds that can and should be issued for the project, and then the total cost and the final priorities in the plan. And so whether or not that fits and how that weighs with the other priorities will be up to you. But I don't know. I can't say I know the answer to that question right now, but they are eligible costs to be considered. That's at least one piece I think I can answer specifically, which is the utilities as associated with the field house, which is a major tourism contributor for the Star Bond District. That would cause those to be eligible costs for sure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So then it's just a matter of dollars and cents and what you're going to have with that project piece.
Okay. All right, any further questions? Because I think we're to a point where, and I don't know that we're ever going to, I know that until it's filled, I'm not going to be satisfied with guessing on the gap. And I don't know if we ever came to any resolution on who we're making any sort of agreement with if we have a gap anyway. And I don't know how. Somebody would have to come up with how to resolve that, because I mean we've got to start dealing with, and this is just a recommendation from 20% of this board, is that I think more clear communication would help solve a lot of the questions before they turn into any sort of problem. So if we have, I mean, and maybe it's just the nature of it, maybe 2020 is in a position moving forward from this date to take the lead, but we need clear leadership so we know who we're dealing with and who we can expect to go deal with you and staff on, and not have it come from 2 and 3 different, 4 different sources. And part of that is that and maybe you can tell us, how close are we to getting any sort of development agreements put together on the alley, on the hotel, and on the anything else on this thing? Because there's a lot promised out there for this field house going in. So
Yeah.
how close are we to those?
Well, we're getting real close, because first we have to get a plan submitted to the state, one that they'll accept and approve. That's the very first thing. And then, quite honestly, while they're looking at that, we can start thinking about development agreements, because that's where you have a lot of details with regards to the transactions in the Star Bond District, and at the same time do the more kind of intense financial analysis that needs to happen, the prudent financial analysis that helps lead again to the final determination of the bonds, the bond structure, things like that. So that's the next phase. That's really, we want to get the state looking at the plan, and then we want to start looking at those 2 pieces at the same time. Those all lead up to implementation of the plan once it's approved.
Okay.
So we're very close.
Well, that would give me a little more comfort on this, and I think it would help things go a lot smoother as well. So,
Well,
okay.
and I don't want to be sure that we're clear too, because while the field house is a primary tourism generator and is part of the plan, as you remember, it started sort of as a standalone project, and then it became the cornerstone for the Star Bond, the larger Star Bond downtown project. With regards to, I'm going to set the field house aside for a second, but all the other projects, private projects that will be listed to be done in the Star Bond plan, you'll have development agreements attached to those, presumably. I think that's what we've talked about, and that's what we all expect to happen, both public and private sector. The field house has always been a little bit different, so I don't know, and this is really it's not a question as much for me as it is for those involved with fundraising and so forth, but I don't know if it's reasonable to expect a development agreement with the field house itself. Now, the other stuff it is, but with that one, and the reason is because I don't know if anyone can say that they know for sure they can deliver X number of dollars or up to X number of dollars on a particular date. They can try. I don't know if they can do that. But so I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that particular question, but I know those are the concerns with it. And so that's basically all I know at this point in time. But you're in a position to have expectations Doesn't mean they're fulfilled, but you can have expectations and communicate expectations, whatever you agree on with regards to those. And if they're not fulfilled, then you have a decision at a particular point in time. So even if you don't have an agreement, you can set expectations so that everyone is clear what they are, because I think that's whatever your expectations are, it's important that everyone understands them. And it's important that they understand them in time if there is an attempt to do something about them. If you wait and the expectations are communicated at the very end, there's not time to respond to them. So whatever you might have, if you have agreement on those and you communicate those, then people know whether they need to adjust or not adjust to them. And so even if you don't have agreement, your part of it is, you can have your part of it, which is these are our expectations. If they're not met, then you can fill in the blank. So you have that ability anyway.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Maybe I'd like to address just a couple of points. I'm Trace Walker, 1608 Reese Road, Brookville, Kansas. Sorry, but in regard to this whole process and the reason that the field house is so important to get this rolling is because, for example, the action that was taken in the legislature, we just feel it's really important that we get our Star Bond project presented to the Commerce Department. And in regard to your concern, Mayor, about the group and the timing and so forth, and especially the development agreements, those have to happen. Obviously, we want one from our side. We're going to want to know what our deal is with the city, and we understand you're going to want to know exactly what the hotel's committed to, what the alley's committed to, and so on and so forth. But Salina 2020 has already spent about $250,000. Excuse me, I apologize. But they've already spent about $250,000 of donated money to try to drive this project forward. Part of that is the OH&H group that's here now, that's trying to put together a really comprehensive plan based on many stakeholders' input for what do we want our downtown to look like. But to come back and address that development part, we have used up a lot of funds. The legal bills are significant. Salina 2020 has paid all of those. And we don't think it's prudent to spend any more of those people's money until we find out, are we going to get Star Bonds? Once we know the answer to that, then we can go back and come to you and say, okay, we've got them. We know how much money we have. These are the suggested places we're going to use those funds. So much, hopefully, for streetscape, so much perhaps to fill the gap on the field house, so much to help other parts of this project happen. And then we'll come back and we'll do what's also going to cost a lot of money, a lot of legal counsel, a lot of your staff's time, and we're going to start working out the details, hopefully, of those development agreements, which I think will answer all your questions. But right now, in regard to the Star Bond part of it, and I think the field house is they've become linked. That wasn't the idea in the beginning, but it's a big piece of the Star Bond application. But really what we want to see happen right now, just as soon as possible, is get the application into Commerce Department so that we can get an answer from them. Is it worth us moving forward on all these things, or isn't it? We're wasting our time. We've already wasted an awful lot of money if the answer is no. We think we've got a 95% chance of it being yes, but we're never going to know the answer to that until we get it submitted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, appreciate that. The application is ready to go within a week or two?
Well, yeah, we hope. I mean, I think we hope to have, and when we say application, we're really not talking about a formal application at this point in time, but we hope to have information that covers the project sufficient enough for the Commerce to look at it and give us feedback. Usually there's an opportunity for feedback. You refine it and then you formalize it. And so we hope, this week even, possibly. Okay. We're really close. So
and
that's
so
what
we'll hear back. We'll know a go on Star Bonds when.
I think we will know where Commerce sits on the issue well in advance of awarding a contract on the Fieldhouse project.
Okay. Do you want me to ask the question if we don't get Star Bonds?
That's up to you. Yeah, I mean, you do have to look and say, well, what if we don't get new market tax credits? What if we don't get star bonds? Now, if you don't get star bonds, it doesn't mean that, I don't want to get too much into the detail of that because we haven't really talked much about that. But what we have for the downtown is a combination of star bonds and a tax increment finance district. Okay? If by chance we don't get star bonds, we go back and say, well, what's Plan B? Can we put the main pieces, some of the main pieces in with a TIF district? We might be able to do that. We don't know yet, but we might. So you're always trying to create a Plan B and maybe even a Plan C and a Plan D, but we're always trying to figure out if this doesn't happen, what other opportunities do we have? And so we'll keep trying to do that.
Okay. Appreciate that. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and there's a number of things on a motion. One to be if there's a desire to change the authorization amount, please do so in the motion. And is there anything? Yeah, Phil. I mean, the motion to change the authorization amount would be contained in the charter ordinance, but none of the other. We
Right,
don't
it's
muddy
specific.
up the other with the gap. Or
Correct.
any of the
Yeah,
other.
if you
Would we
want to
need
address that formally first, if you're ready to do that, and then you could follow up after you do that with a general motion about the 3.3B concept and or about the process, the bidding and so forth.
Would you be coming back with a resolution with all those or all those changes, or would that be just on the fly?
Well, on the 3.3B, we just need your direction, and we know
Okay,
what
I
we're
think we've
headed
done
towards.
that,
That's
so you're-
pretty easy.
yeah, you've
Yeah, and
done
if you wanted to put it in a motion just so it shows
Okay.
up in your minutes
Okay.
clearly, that's not a bad thing. You can do that after the charter ordinance motion. And then I think on the question of continuing with the type of bidding and the process with McCown Gordon on the guaranteed maximum price and all of that versus a pure competitive bid process.
Okay.
That one would be good to have a motion, but the motion would be to bring back whatever formal action is
Right.
necessary to get you there. When you get to that one, if you want to cover the first two, when you get to that one, I think just to be clear, I want to make sure that McCown Gordon representatives have an opportunity, and maybe even John Frew, if he feels it necessary, to make sure you're clear on the differences, just to be 100% clear on those before you would hit that motion. And so, but that can be the last thing you do.
Okay. All right, so what we'll do then is we'll do a motion for the charter ordinance, second reading, with, if it's desired in the motion maker, to change the authorization amount, to change that, and then following that vote, we will take two votes, one on directing staff to pursue a 3-and-3 option on the design, and then a separate motion to direct staff towards the contractual desires of moving it to a competitive bid.
Sounds good.
So, we'll go ahead and move forward, Charter 39 on a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be willing to make that motion. I move that we approve second reading of Charter Ordinance Number 39, a charter ordinance exempting the city of Salina, Kansas from the provisions of KSA 13-1024A and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to general improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements, and repealing Charter Ordinance Number 38 and amending under the project category descriptions under public building for recreational purposes, number 4, a maximum of 9.5 reduced to 7.5 under the project category H.
Second.
Okay, have a motion and a second to approve on second reading Charter Ordinance Number 39, a charter ordinance exempting the city of Salina, Kansas from the provisions of KSA 13-1024A and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to general improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements, and repealing Charter Ordinance Number 38, amending Section 2, Number 4, to read a maximum of $7,500,000 under project category H.
Commissioners, just a reminder on the charter ordinance, you do need, as I think you're aware, you would take 4 out of 5 of you to support that.
Takes 4 out of 5. A motion and a second. Is there any further discussions or comments at this time?
I would, I was uncomfortable with $9.5 million. I'm really uncomfortable with $7.5 million. I was thinking in terms of something closer to 7. I mean, we're not talking a lot of difference, but that, in my mind, I think I feel compelled to think that we can build this project for a lesser amount, and I'm thinking that 7 is probably going to be very generous when it all settles out. But I would vote in favor of $7 million.
Would you care to? Are you wanting to amend the motion?
That's what I'd like to do.
Okay. Have a motion to amend the motion to change the amount from. Is there just?
I want to make sure this is a pretty formal process on the motion making for this particular thing. I want to defer to Greg to make sure that if we are amending the motion that we do that to the letter, just to make sure there's no question about it later.
That would be best. I think if Commissioner Hardy had a motion to amend,
right,
that he make that motion, and then you have an opportunity to be sure that it's seconded before it advances.
Okay, I was just restating the motion.
Oh, I understand it.
Did I get a second?
Second his amendment.
You got a second on that? Okay.
This is the type of thing that bond counsel will look at later. Is the reason I think Mr. Gage is correct in making sure that.
I think my recollection, he made the statement. You asked if he wanted that as a motion. He said yes, but I don't think he said I moved to. I think that's probably important for this particular. Sometimes we're a little bit looser on some of our other actions, but on this one, it's probably important just to make sure that the motion is just.
Rather than me restate it, he should.
Yeah,
say it. Okay.
I think probably so.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
I move to amend the motion to reflect a reduction of the amount of $9.5 million in subsection 4 for the amount of $9.5 million to go to $7 million.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to amend the motion to change the authorized amount from $7,500,000 to $7 million. Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0.
Do we need a roll call?
Okay. So the motion on the table is, no, that's.
We're amending the
Yeah, we're
prior
just,
motion.
that vote was on the amendment. So
Sorry.
I'll go ahead just for bond counsel's sake. So the motion on the table as amended is a second reading of Charter Ordinance Number 39, a Charter Ordinance exempting the City of Salina, Kansas from the provisions of KSA 13-24A and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to general improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements and repealing Charter Ordinance Number 38, amending Section 2, Number 4, to read a maximum of $7 million under project category H. Okay, is there any further discussion and or comment at this time?
Comment.
Okay.
I'm excuse me, glad we had our discussion this morning. And I like very much the fact that the amount we're considering as a maximum amount to bond is closer to what we think our portion of the total cost would be. But we are still gambling on funding the gap with the new market tax credits and or star bond receipts. I'm hoping that our other discussion, will give our local subcontractors opportunity to bid on this project. But it does come at the risk of the city being on the hook for any or for all of the gap, without any means to stimulate further private donations. But I think this is it's a reasonable investment for the citizens of Salina to stimulate private development of our downtown.
I'd just like to say that I appreciate the deliberation here and the process of trying to get at a number that's a little closer to a real number. And while I was hoping that this would come in as a 50-50 and stay within the budget that we had originally thought, it doesn't appear that is going to be feasible. Having said that, I think that I like the number where it is now much more than I was before, but I think that we really need to be conscientious that this project is one step in what has been a pretty publicized and pretty I don't know what to call it other than it's very ambitious, and that's good in a lot of ways, but I just hope we're not overpromising and not being able to deliver. But I will trust that I spent time yesterday with the design group, and they're working diligently. They've got a great plan going. I hope that more people will go down to the art warehouse and participate in that. But I've long been a proponent of downtown and redevelopment, and I think without a strong downtown, we lose the heart of our community. I think what goes along with that, and I think the only way downtown is successful is if we address two key components that we don't talk a lot in the discussion of the field house and so on, but those two things are housing in the core and the overall health in the core, and we need to bring our housing stock up in the core. The values in the core are plummeting. We need to turn that ship around. That needs to be our highest valued. People need to want to live downtown. Hopefully this will help to spur it, but we need to make sure that our policies are not competing against incentivizing downtown housing in the first ring of housing around the downtown. Nobody wants to drive through Blight to get to a nice downtown. So we really need to double down and further push the quality housing component for downtown. And then the second thing, and I think everybody up here would agree with me, and we're taking steps, and that is we have got to get wages up in this community. I mean, it doesn't matter how nice our downtown is if people don't have the money to go down there and spend it. It's not going to do anything. And I think that setting up the EDO has taken a big step in turning that around. So I think that those things are things that we really need to focus on. And I hope that this vote today won't just be a vote and we move on, but that we take a lot of lessons learned from this and move forward with it. So I intend to vote in favor of this and swallow a little hard, but that's okay. I think, and I hope that my concerns are just that, concerns, and they're not problems down the road. So, with that, is there any other comments?
Well, I guess I'll make one comment that most of it seems like I've been on the commission now going on 6 years, if you can all believe that. Been here the longest. But, most of those decisions you make are just mundane, everyday, buying forklifts for the street department or things like that. This decision does impact Salina and our future citizens and young people. And I just feel like I study all the decisions. I really take to heart our packet and study it. And I've done my best on this. I know there's a lot of controversy in the community. But I think once that they see this building start to come out of the ground, I think people will I think they'll get on the wagon and help us with that. But anyway, I do always, during our moment of silence, say a little prayer too that we're making the right decision. So my decision for young people will be also aye.
Okay, well, the time is at hand. We'll go ahead and ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Crawford,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hardy,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Blanchard.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0. Okay, just one quick note, if you will, because one of the things when we do pass a charter ordinance is that there is a petition period. And just for those who are not happy with a decision, should they choose to petition this, is there a way that they can get information on that, or is it through the city clerk's office or through the city manager's office, or what do they need to do?
The petition process is actually more related to the county election officer in that it potentially leads to an election that would have to be conducted by the county election officer. There is a preview process actually by the county counselor that is involved. So I don't know if the city manager has any further observation as to direct contacts or anything, but it is largely a process in anticipation of election conducted by the county election officer, with the review of any proposed petition being conducted by the county counselor.
Could we have some information put together should anybody call the commission, the number that's given for city commission? Is there somewhere we can refer somebody to? Because I'm just asking because I anticipate that I may get a call.
But I guess I'll ask the question, Greg, that the person to be that we'd refer someone to would be the county counselor in the end, wouldn't it? Because the first question is if a petition in form is proper, is considered proper for that use, and that's where you get that answer. And then at that point, after that, they can provide directions with regards to signatures and so forth. But yeah, I think that's where it would be, wouldn't it?
That's true. I suppose one point of clarification, the county counselor is not in the role of advising or providing legal advice in relation to that matter. It's a review of a proposed petition. So one would certainly want to consult whatever source they might wish in terms of assistance. There are statutory requirements related to any such petition, and one would want to either become a student of those statutes or have good advice in the preparation of a draft that is then reviewed by the county counselor.
And that period is 61 days. So 61 days from now is when the charter ordinance would be effective.
Yes, it's actually a 60-day period under the statute. The ordinance is not effective until that 60 days has lapsed, and that's why you see reference in the charter ordinance to it being effective 61 days.
Okay.
And that assumes the expiration of the 60-day protest period.
Greg, when does the 60 days start? Is it after today's action or is it after the publication?
The 60 days begins after, there are two weeks of publication in this case, and it will commence after the second publication.
Okay. Well, we have two other items of business that are left open, and they include the direction of staff on a 3-3, basically building design issue and then contracting issue.
Yeah, and commissioners, just for clarity for the minutes later, if we go back, we can know exactly what your intent was. Is I would say a motion would be something that moved to ask staff to work with the design team to focus on what was presented as a 3B option as a design concept, and make that the option that we are wishing to design to. We know there's subtleties. It doesn't lock you into every little line up there, but there are minor subtleties in the end of the final design, but we know exactly then what to do at that point.
Okay.
Can I say so moved?
Well, I'll go ahead and say it.
Yeah.
I move that we direct staff to work with the design team to move towards the 3B option for the field house.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to direct staff to work with the design team towards design of the facility in the 3-3B configuration. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries 5-0. So staff is directed to do that. And the second one is on construction.
Yeah, and I can give you, before we get to that, I can give you one other motion, and it's up to you if you want to emphasize it. If you don't, it's no big deal. But you could, just again, to be on the record, that people know exactly what your expectations are, to be on the record to move that staff work with the project team to value engineer this as quickly as, that option as quickly as possible, to eliminate any cost items in design that don't carry significant value to the end result, and also to focus on alternatives, including new market tax credits and reasonably star bonds and any other option to fill whatever gap there might be in the end, so that the burden isn't, any possible burden isn't placed on the taxpayers. You could do a so moved on something like that if it's your desire to kind of want to emphasize those things to us more formally. If you feel like you've done it informally, that's perfectly fine, but if you feel like you want to formalize that, you could just say so moved and do that. I believe that's what your context was.
Yeah, there you go. I'm not going to repeat that.
Second that.
Okay, I got a motion and a second on a direction of staff to look at various items to include the gap financing approach and
And the value engineering of the project.
value engineering
Yeah.
for project budget cost consideration. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes also 5-0.
Okay. And then the final item has to do with, again, we're under contract, under a guaranteed, a construction manager at risk contract with a guaranteed maximum price approach for the total project cost, with McCown Gordon being the construction manager, which you can visualize as the general contractor for certain pieces of the building, and all the sub work is to be bid out. That's the way you're set up today. What I wanted to do before you make a motion on that is I feel that I want to make sure that you fully understand, we've talked about it some, but that you fully understand the differences between that approach and what would be considered a complete, independent, a competitive sealed bid approach for the entire project. I just want to make sure that you don't have any questions in your mind before you would decide to give direction to staff. If you do give direction to staff to steer away from what we would call, I'll call the guaranteed maximum price approach, into a true independent competitive bid for the entire project approach, the motion would basically be that we bring back the action necessary to do that, because we don't have that action. We haven't presumed anything here, so we don't have a specific action that does that. It would be for us to bring that back to you at a future meeting, presumably your next regular meeting.
I have a question on that, and if we go to sort of the design bid build model on that, we're still open to change orders on that.
Yes.
And what happens if we're right up against what we figured would probably, I mean, if we're working together to get a guaranteed maximum price, we're going to kind of know what that is as we're leading up to that. And we know when we get that guaranteed maximum price that we're underneath our bonding authority. What happens if we get a change order in that? Are we taking that out through general, is that coming out of our general fund, or how are we going to pay for the change order?
Good question. There are a couple of risks that I can think of, and I think John and the others I certainly would encourage them to offer up any others in that process. But one risk would be change orders, and a change order means you've got a bid, something comes up, you're already committed, something comes up in the middle, and we look at it and we say, it's not really their fault or their fault. It's truly a pure change order issue, and all of a sudden your project cost went from whatever it was at that point in time, and this is in a design bid build, not the current process. And you say, well, we got to do it, so it's $50,000, $20,000, could be $2,000. You don't know what it is, but in the end, if it's something that we feel we have to do for the project, and we really can't say you should have known, you should have known, you should have known, in design bid build, you're stuck with that change order. Maybe it's an unforeseen condition that you wouldn't expect them to reasonably see. So you're right, the construction manager at risk process it does pretty much eliminate the opportunity for that.
Mm-hmm.
The other risk is that you get the bids, okay, with the construction manager at risk, we continue to value engineer, and they get their bids, and then if it still comes in high, we have the ability to say, well, gosh, is there something else we can do? You can keep pushing and pushing. At some point, you got to say, we're all done. We're not going to hassle you anymore, but here's the guaranteed maximum price. It's as good as it's going to be. We're not going to change anything else. But it's an evolution of addressing those things up until that time is really basically what it is. In a design bid build, you get the design. Usually the designer in that case will give you an estimate. It's the best that they can do with construction documents, but you don't really know what the price is until you bid it. You get the bidding, and then there's a presumption that that's the most competitive approach. Doesn't mean it's the lowest price, but you can presume it might be. I don't know, however you want to look at that. But you get the bid. You have a low bidder. Let's say you have, I'm going to make up and say 5 bidders in the low bid, and the low bid's a lot higher than you want it to be. You're like, oh no, what can we change now? In that case, if you want to go and change, you're talking about a rebid probably, because you don't sit down and start negotiating with the low bidder. Depending on what it is, if it's a big gap and it's a real minor item and it doesn't harm the integrity of the bid, you could probably do that to a degree. But if you have multiple bidders and they're all pretty close and it's a big item, then the other bidders say, well, I want an opportunity to rebid on that as well. If you're going to change a scope piece, let's rebid and do that. It's a timeline factor. So that's a risk in the design bid build approach as well.
Okay.
Now, I'd turn it over to John. He knows this stuff inside and out and can give you some other thoughts.
Thanks, Jason. It's been a long morning, so I'll try to walk through this quickly, but it is a critical path issue. First, they're what we call a delivery method. How do you deliver a building? And there are a variety of them. 2 of them are the construction manager at risk with a guaranteed maximum price contract, and another is the design bid build process. Typically, the more complex a project is, you shift to this. Many states, as it doesn't matter how complex it is, you have to do a design bid build. State of Iowa, for example, that's where we work. So you find different views of it. I'm a big fan of the CMAR when it works right. Now, here's your challenge. And as a parenthetic note, there will be change orders. It will happen. And the key is that no work, and this is our job, no work can be done until it's been priced out, short of an emergency. Priced out, we know what it is, we vetted it, it's been approved, the city has signed off on it, the architect signed off on it. We know what the number is, we know if there's a schedule impact, and then we give it to the contractor, and then they do the work. So it's a very, very controlled environment. That's how you control that contingency. But ultimately, it comes down to this. A design bid build process means you don't know what your price is until you design it, and then you bid it. And the more incomplete the design is, the more porous it is, the poorer the documents, then it doesn't matter which delivery method, you're going to end up with bidding that's not very good. You're going to end up with whoops. So how do you address that? Well, one issue that's very key, and Aaron's very, very good at this, that you don't just say as a contractor, well, I made a mistake on that one, you got to pay me. If something's reasonably inferable from the contract documents, then you're a big boy, you signed it, you're 21, you fix it. The city's not going to pay for it. That's what we do, and that's what Aaron does on your behalf. Again, that's how we manage that. So it comes down to this. With a CMAR process, you typically have you always have the benefit of having the contractor on board way early in the process. Again, here's an idea, and here's where it's designed out. Now you have them working with you all the way through. So we call that the pre-construction phase. And then you brought them on here, you've signed the contract, which you've done with McCown Gordon. And when the pricing's done, you sign what's called the GMP amendment. Only then do you know the price. And that's after they have bid and they put it out to bid. And that's some of what they've done so far, but formally that's going to come in the months ahead. So what's the benefit at this point? Well, the design is going to be done. It's going to be completed. And it's going to be 100% completed pending these changes. So you're going to have a design that I think is going to be very good. It won't be porous. It will be clean. So you've now equalized those 2 delivery methods. What does it mean for your contract with McCown Gordon? The pre-construction phase obligates you to pay $5,000 per month for 5 months. So it's a cheap date, relatively speaking. contractors will normally do that, and then they go on with the GMP. The 5 months is up on February 14th, yesterday, Sunday, so today. The first, anyway, February 14th. So if it goes on another month, then it's just another $5,000. So it's not a big number. We've gotten tremendous value out of them, but if you now have a choice, and I've gone through this process in this description to just describe that choice. If you, when you say competitively bid, and I know that, Commissioner, you had mentioned that, both ways are competitively bid. The GMP, the contractor, will competitively bid, as well as it would be us and the architect on behalf of the city. Ultimately, if you put it out, if you terminate the contract with McCown Gordon and competitively bid it, then we would recommend it be one contractor that would be selected. Anyone could bid on it. McCown Gordon, presumably this would be something for Aaron, could bid on it, and then off we go. But it's going to be, either way, it's going to be based on that 100% drawings. Where I really want to underscore is that don't get a feeling of safety in those words, guaranteed maximum price contract, because there are always holes in those contracts. There are allowances that are always built in. And the allowance just means it's a guess. And if they're wrong, you pay. If they're right and it comes in less, you get the savings. That's always built in. So the further along you are in the design, the more certainty there is in competitively bidding outside of that CMAR process. I will say that McCown Gordon has done an excellent job. They've been very good to work with, and they've provided great value. But those are your choices between the two, and I hope that helps clarify.
I have a question. Would the complexity of the project feed into that decision as well? Because, for instance, with the Buy Center, it's a very complex, a lot of moving pieces project, and in that particular case, I think a company like McCown Gordon in the CMAR process served us very well. In a case like the Field House, it's a relatively straightforward building project, and there are not as many moving parts to it, that having it bid a different way might not be quite as risky as the case of the Buy Center.
Well, I agree the Buy Center was a complex project. It was not new construction, and it was a renovation of a very old building with a lot of moving parts to it, very complex. This has its own complexity to it. This is not something that just anyone can do, I may put it that way. But are there local contractors who could build this? Yes. Yes, they are. And we've worked with at least one of them, and I have no doubt. I think the benefit of having a McCown comes in two phases. One phase is that pre-construction, which you've enjoyed. The other phase is the construction phase. If you were to replace them with someone else, that you ended up, there's a risk, because you don't know who you're going to end up getting. But if you feel confident you're going to end up getting someone of equal or better value, then I don't see that you've lost anything. It's not a bad decision. I'm not sure there's a right decision. But as long as the design is done, that is so key. At that point, I know there are a lot of local guys that want to bid on this. A lot of them will get the opportunity to bid through McCown, or your choice is to let them bid directly.
Mm-hmm. But we will have good design.
I think we'll have an excellent design
by the time bidding comes around.
Well, the decisions you made this morning eliminated the worst possible thing you can have in a project, and that's uncertainty. You've given us certainty. It's our job now to give you back certainty on the budget and to finish the design. But the design is about 4 weeks from being done now, thanks to the decision. So that means so much versus leaving here and not sure how to move forward. Now we know what to do. So the design is going to be complete. It'll be very good. At that point, it'll be very biddable.
Mr. Furley, in your experience in communities of this size, do local contractors tend to bid as frequently as, or you get a lot out of?
I think that for something of this size, you're going to get, if you were to put it out just for the construction, you're going to end up with regional and probably some national. We work with Hunt Construction out of Dallas to build a $45 million center in Austin. And they are a very large company, but they built the Dodge City Arena. I mean, they will, because they do exactly this kind of work, and they don't do any other kind of work. So it doesn't matter if it's small or large, they'll go after it. Those are the easy ones. I think the more challenging ones, when you look at truly local contractors, they're usually held up by their bonding capacity. Because this has to be a bonded job for the hard construction price. And so a lot of contractors, if they're busy, they only have so much capacity in there, they won't be able to bond it because it will exceed it. So that's a lot of times what holds them up. Otherwise, I think you'll get good representation.
And it's only really the GC that we're worried about with the bonding capacity, because most of the subs are going to be local anyway, no matter who the GC is.
And they'll all be bonded through the GC.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But in terms of who ends up doing the work?
I would assume. I mean, we had a pretty, the McCown guys can tell you more, on both the Buy Center and then Bus Boom we work with on the fire station. I think the fire station it was all local. We may have had, I'll say regional, whether it's Wichita or Manhattan, but not necessarily from Salina. But you didn't have anybody from Denver or Kansas City or Des Moines.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Todd?
Thank you. If I may add to that, great job analyzing the two different systems. And I would echo the sentiment that there's no one right answer for any given project. You have CMAR and design bid build. There's inherent benefits to both. I would say that CMAR right now is where we really start to shine and we really start to bring value. So far we have been designing and budgeting to a program. We have not brought those creative solutions to the table yet based on the unknown factors and all the different stakeholders that wanted to come to the table and bring their ideas to the forefront. So this is where we can come and bring those 50, 75, 100 ideas to the table, bring those cost decisions to the table and let you folks make those decisions. If you continue with design through to the end where the drawings are 100% complete, as John stated, you're locked into a certain project, a certain scope. Yes, you're getting your very best bang for that project on that day, but we can get you from today to your $7 million budget that you've just established. So I would echo that there is a lot of service that we can bring to the table right now. And also, when we proposed on this project, we brought forth a $75,000 discount based on the fact that we would be overlapping this project with the remaining work at the Bicentennial this coming summer. So I want you to understand that that is incorporated into our budget right now, and those costs are not being realized if you go in a hard bid scenario. That makes sense. So I'd entertain any further questions you might have.
Questions? No. Thank you. Okay.
If I could just clarify one thing. The VE items that will be vetted with or without McCown. I mean, that's what we do. That's what the architects do. That's what the city staff does. So I don't want you to leave you with the impression that that there's that hanging over you. You have a decision that you can choose either way, and it just truly is that. I think as we've talked over the past few days and the past few weeks, I'm comfortable, either way, because the design is so far along. So I have great respect for McCown, but listen, this is all about you, and it's all about the city. And it's whatever gets the best bang for your buck. And if you want to choose to make this a competitive bid, we do that all the time. We'll make it happen. We'll put it out for you, and it'll be fine. If you want to stick with McCown through that process and get the benefit, and they do bring a benefit, we'll work with that too, either way.
Okay. Thank you. Bob.
Thank you. Bob Miller, 500 Country Club Road. Not to refute anything that John or Todd has said, it's been a great exchange of information, probably the best analyzation of the two of that process that I've heard for a while. One of the things I'd just like to point out is in our market area, which is about a 15-20 county area, there's probably only about a third of the qualified subcontractors that bid the CMAR process, and there are a lot of them that do not bid the CMAR process, but will bid an open competitive design bid build process. In addition, at the end of the bid taking process, when the bids are open, you have a very transparent cost for the project. So at that point, that project has been hard costed. It does not have a contingency in it, but you can establish a contingency for construction. But that is a hard number, and that company is willing to put a bond up to bond that number. So in the event there are any issues, you have a bond that you can rely on that will guarantee delivery of that project at his bid price. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Just one, any particular reason that a lot of the local subcontractors do not bid the CMAR route?
CMAR is a relatively new process for our area. I think that, of course, 99, we had the bond issue. J.E. Dunn was construction manager on that. We have the current bond issue that's going, but for a lot of our projects, this is a relatively new process. We have a number of smaller subcontractors that may not necessarily be able to bond a project, but in the past, as a bondable general contractor, we're able to maybe take 2 or 3 of those subcontractors and put them together to employ our local people, whereas that system is not really recognized in the CMAR format. So we maximize the participation of our local workforce as well. And that maximization of that workforce is really necessary to start bringing our wages up, as Mr. Mayor addressed earlier. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And I'd like to thank all 3 of you for really good comments there. So let's go ahead and bring. Did you want to add something, or let's take action and go to lunch?
Yeah, good idea.
And I'll just say this. I don't know that I could be happier with the outcome of the Bicentennial Center and with the fire station. And those were both done with CAMR process, with Fruit Construction as our design rep, and incidentally, both contractors that did those are here. Buzz Boom and Rao did a great job on Fire Station number 2, and that process was so much nicer than phase 1. And I think there are reasons for that. And also the Bicentennial Center, I couldn't be more pleased with that, and that was a great job. I kind of, unless there's something wrong with my horse, I don't want to change horses in the middle of the race, because I think we have a known quantity, we have a known quality that we can come to expect from the outcome. And for that reason, I kind of feel like I prefer to stay with the process that we have underway, but I got a feeling I'm going to be on the short end of this again, so if one of you wanted to make a motion.
Just one comment. If staff was directed to prepare a proposal for that action, we would still have the opportunity to retain the CMAR process. I'm assuming this would be done at next Monday's meeting, and that would not affect the design portion whatsoever.
It wouldn't affect the design portion. It would likely change the costing out, I would think. I'd look at John, but I'm pretty sure it'd change the final costing out. But again, in the end, we're estimating all the way up, in this case, in the CMAR, up until you get a guaranteed maximum price. And once you get that, as I stated, most of the costs are bid out by subs. So you have bid prices for most of the work at that point in time, all but the portion that's actually being done by the general contractor. So I don't really see any significant difference in the design approach in the role of the city and the owner's rep and so forth. I don't see that at all. I'm not sure if I'm hitting your question.
Well, if we were to take a week to think about this, I guess my brain's getting a little tired, which is not good for my 1 o'clock patient to hear that. But if we were to think about this for a week, this would not, I mean, any final changes in costs, I'm assuming would be minimal. The design is going to proceed anyway.
Yeah, taking a week won't affect I don't think it'll affect your costs at this point. Now, what I'd recommend is if you're contemplating that you'd like a change, the motion should be to have us bring what that change would be that enables you to do that. Otherwise, you're going to take another week after that. So you can still percolate on it. We can give you an action item, and then you can choose what you want to do with it at your next meeting.
Okay, and just one other question. Not being in the building business, as you all are aware, is it unethical or unfair to provide local contractors assistance they might need to be able to be bonded for a project like this?
Well, I'll tell you the premise of how the different communities are all different. Salina has, at least for decades, has not provided any form of a local preference. Usually the local preference is not in that form. It's usually in the form of if you're within a certain percent, then the local gets it if the lowest would be a non-local. Generally speaking, the reason we haven't done that, I think, and it goes even before me, but I think it's because there's always a concern that if you don't have enough locals to do all the type of work and you upset the rest of the pool of bidders, they'll walk away and not come back and want to bid, and you will be potentially left, and it depends on the project, with limited bidders, and limited bidders oftentimes can mean a higher cost. Now, I'm not saying we've ever experienced that here, and I want to be clear that that's not what I'm trying to say. It's more of a textbook response to that. But that, I think, goes back into the approach that the city's always taken. So it's always been the lowest and best. You hope that being local, you don't have to, stay in hotels. That if you've got the labor around here and some of that you hope that the lower cost comes from locals because of being local. That's part of it. But that's about as deep as I can take you into that from what I know.
Okay, we have a motion.
Move that we direct staff to make provisions to provide for design bid build contract for the field house.
Second.
Okay, have a motion and a second to direct staff to make provisions to provide for moving the direction of this construction project to a design bid build process.
Now, is this a decision to definitely change the process,
Yep.
or just bring information to consider it?
Yeah, you need a formal action item, so I inferred it as bring back whatever action item would get you there, and obviously you'll approve or not approve that when we do bring that to you, presumably at the next meeting.
So this would basically get us a blue sheet with the pros and
Yes.
cons, but
And the actual action that gets you there. And then
but
you
the
can
action
decide.
would not actually be taken until next week.
Yeah, correct, because we don't have that prepared.
Would one of those directions include stay with the CAMR process?
Well, yeah, in essence, if we bring you the action item, it saves you another week of contemplate and then tell us what to do, so it's in front of you. We need to really look and see what that action item is. We haven't really spent enough time on that, but then that doesn't mean you have to approve that. That's just us preparing for that, and then you get to spend the week thinking about it, and then next week you might still decide you don't want to do that, and that's perfectly fine. Or you might decide you want to do it, and you could act if you wish.
Okay. So the action next week would decide whether or not we continue down the road with the CAMR
Yes.
switch? Okay.
Yeah, and the motion is to prepare for that, so that you have that item in front of you. I believe that this is what the intent of the motion is.
Okay. That's the intent of the motion and the second. Any further discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Okay. I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have 5
Second.
motions to adjourn in 5 seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it.